Good evening. Welcome to this space. Tonight, we walk together through 9 sacred stories told by the Buddha himself. Stories that have crossed centuries to reach your heart exactly when you need them most. The Zen Buddhist path offers us these gentle parables as lanterns in the dark, illuminating what lives within us already. If your heart wishes, share with us which country you are listening from and what time it is there. From which corner of this vast world do you breathe with us tonight? This is your sanctuary for inner cultivation, a place to nourish the mind and awaken the spirit that has always been awake. Here you need not do anything, achieve anything, or become anything other than what you already are. You can simply be, breathe, and allow these ancient words to guide you inward to the quiet temple of your own presence. Everything you seek is already planted within you, like seeds waiting for gentle rain. If these stories touch something deep and true, return whenever you need this silent meeting with yourself. Subscribe to keep this harbor of peace close by. Now, take a deep breath, settle into this moment, and know that you are exactly where you belong. The poisoned arrow. There once lived a monk named Malunkyaputta who sought the Buddha with urgent questions burning intensely in his restless mind. He had practiced for some time, but found himself caught in webs of philosophical speculation that prevented him from moving deeper into the teachings. He found the teacher sitting peacefully beneath the Bodhi tree one afternoon and approached with great seriousness. "Venerable Buddha," he said, "there are questions you have not answered, and they trouble me constantly. Does the universe have boundaries, or does it stretch forever into infinite space? Do we exist after death, or dissolve into absolute nothing? Is the soul separate from the body, or are they one unified thing? Please, I must know these answers before I can truly commit to this path." The Buddha listened with quiet, compassionate eyes, but did not answer directly. Instead, he told this story. Imagine a man walking through a forest when suddenly he is struck in the chest by a poisoned arrow, the sharp tip piercing deep, the toxin already beginning to spread rapidly through his blood toward his heart. His friends, traveling with him, rush him immediately to a skilled physician who has herbs and tools ready to save his life. But as the physician prepares to remove the arrow and administer the antidote, the wounded man raises his trembling hand weakly and refuses treatment. "Wait," he says through labored breaths. "I must first know who shot this arrow at me. Was the archer tall or short, dark-skinned or fair? From which village did he come? And what was his family name and lineage? I need to understand his motivations, whether this was personal revenge or random violence, before I can accept help." The physician kneels beside him urgently, needle and healing herbs ready in his experienced hands. But the wounded man continues with his questions despite the physician's protests. "Tell me precisely," he insists. "What kind of wood was used for the arrow shaft? Was it bamboo or reed or perhaps teak? What feathers guided its flight through the air? Were they from an eagle or a crow or some other bird? What metal was the arrowhead forged from? And who was the blacksmith who crafted it? What kind of bow released it with such force? And who made the bowstring? And from what material?" The physician begs him desperately to accept the life-saving treatment immediately, but the man stubbornly insists on receiving complete answers first, before allowing anyone to touch the arrow embedded in his chest. The Buddha paused in his story and looked directly at Malunkyaputta, with deep compassion flowing from his eyes. This man would die long before ever discovering these answers he demands, the Buddha said quietly. The poison does not wait patiently for philosophy to be debated and resolved. The wound does not pause politely for speculation and metaphysical inquiry to reach their conclusions. His questions, though perhaps interesting to an idle mind, have absolutely nothing to do with his immediate survival in this critical moment. What actually matters, what will determine whether he lives or dies, is removing the arrow quickly and treating the spreading poison right now, in this very moment, without any delay whatsoever. Every second wasted on irrelevant questions brings him closer to death. So it is with you, the Buddha continued with gentle firmness. You are wounded by the arrow of suffering, what we call dukkha. Birth itself is painful and traumatic. Aging is painful and humiliating. Sickness is painful and frightening. Death is painful and inevitable. Separation from what we love is acutely painful. Being forced together with what we hate is painful. Not getting what we desperately want is painful. The poison of craving and ignorance spreads through your days and nights, contaminating every experience with dissatisfaction. I offer you the medicine to remove this arrow lodged in your heart, the practical path to cease suffering completely. Whether the cosmos is eternal or finite, whether the self continues after death or vanishes entirely, whether matter or consciousness is primary, these fascinating questions will not save you from your suffering. First, you must tend to the wound that is actually bleeding right now. Malunkyaputta sat in profound silence, understanding dawning slowly in his consciousness, like gentle morning light spreading across still water. He suddenly saw clearly that he had been clutching metaphysical riddles and abstract philosophical puzzles while completely ignoring the suffering right before him. The suffering woven intimately into every breath he took, every thought he thought, every interaction he experienced. The Buddha had offered him genuine relief from this suffering, practical tools for liberation, and he had arrogantly demanded a comprehensive philosophy lecture instead, as if understanding the architecture of the universe would somehow ease the ache in his heart. He bowed deeply before the teacher, tears falling freely onto the earth, and humbly asked to learn the practical path of liberation without further delay or distraction. The Buddha smiled warmly, not with triumph or superiority, but with the infinite tenderness of a wise father watching his confused child finally set down a heavy stone he had been unnecessarily carrying. That very night, beneath an ocean of brilliant stars, he taught Malunkyaputta the four noble truths that form the foundation of all Buddhist practice. Suffering exists as an undeniable fact of conditioned existence. Suffering has a specific cause rooted in craving and ignorance. Suffering can completely end. This is not wishful thinking, but verified reality. There is a clear path to end suffering through ethical conduct, meditation, and wisdom. These truths are medicine, not abstract theory to be endlessly debated. They work reliably regardless of your cosmological speculations or metaphysical conclusions. They address the arrow directly. The story reminds us powerfully that some questions are genuinely skillful, leading toward liberation, while others are elaborate distractions disguised cleverly as wisdom and spiritual inquiry. When your house is actively burning down around you, you do not pause to debate the precise chemistry of combustion or the historical origins of architectural fire codes. You immediately extinguish the flames with whatever means available and lead your loved ones to safety without hesitation. The Buddha came not to satisfy intellectual curiosity or build comprehensive philosophical systems, but to end anguish and show the way to complete freedom. His teachings are practical tools for transformation, a sturdy raft to cross the turbulent river of samsara, not furniture to admire from the shore. Malunkyaputta practiced with sincere diligence after that transformative night, focusing his attention entirely on what was real and immediate, rather than abstract and distant. His breath moving in and out, his bodily sensations arising and passing, his emotional reactions forming and dissolving, the continuous rise and fall of craving and aversion in his mind stream. He completely stopped asking whether the universe had edges in space or time and started asking the truly important question, how can I live right now with an open heart and clear mind? This fundamental shift from the abstract to the intimate, from the theoretical to the experiential, is the beginning of all true practice. The arrow is here now, in this body, in this mind. The healing is also here now, available in this very moment. What questions have you been unconsciously using to avoid the simple, direct work of being fully present to your actual life? What philosophical puzzles and spiritual speculations distract you cleverly from the suffering you could actually address and transform today, right now, with the tools already in your hands? The Buddha invites us with infinite patience to set down the riddles that keep us comfortable and safe in our confusion, and instead pick up the real tools of liberation that actually work: clear awareness, genuine compassion, ethical conduct, and the profound courage to see things exactly as they are without comforting delusions. Let us discover together, as we continue through these ancient stories, what this parable reveals about the true nature of practice and the immediacy of freedom that awaits us. Understanding the poisoned arrow. The parable of the poisoned arrow teaches us something essential about right priorities and the actual purpose of the Dharma, the Buddha's teachings. The Buddha did not come into this world to construct an elaborate cosmological system or provide detailed answers to every possible metaphysical question the restless human mind can generate. He did not claim to know whether the universe extends infinitely or has boundaries, whether it is eternal or finite, whether the soul is identical to the body or separate from it. He remained intentionally silent on these matters, not from ignorance but from compassion and wisdom. He came specifically to address dukkha, the deep unsatisfactoriness and suffering woven fundamentally into conditioned existence. His teaching is practical medicine for an actual ailment, not philosophical entertainment for the curious intellect. It is a hospital emergency room, not a comfortable debate club or academic seminar. This crucial distinction matters profoundly for our practice and determines whether we make genuine progress or spin endlessly in circles. We can easily spend entire lifetimes lost in fascinating speculation about what happens after death, whether consciousness is fundamental or emergent from matter, whether free will exists or everything is rigidly predetermined by cause and effect, whether the universe is purposeful or meaningless. These questions can be intellectually fascinating and emotionally compelling, but they do not ease even slightly the tightness in your chest when anxiety arrives uninvited at 3 a.m. They do not heal the raw grief of losing someone you love deeply. They do not stop the exhausting cycle of craving and aversion that drains your spirit day after day. They do not address the actual wound bleeding right now. The Buddha pointed instead with great clarity to what we can know directly through our own experience and what we can genuinely transform through dedicated practice. We can observe clearly that clinging to pleasant experiences leads inevitably to suffering when they change or end, as they always do. We can notice precisely that aversion to unpleasant experiences creates enormous tension and resistance that amplifies our pain. We can see clearly that ignorance of our true nature, our Buddha nature, perpetuates confusion and keeps us trapped in cycles of reactivity. These insights are directly verifiable in your own immediate experience right now in this moment. You do not need to wait for a philosopher to prove them logically or a scientist to validate them empirically. You can test them carefully in the intimate laboratory of your own heart and mind, your own direct lived experience. Nirodha, the cessation of suffering, is not merely a theoretical concept to be understood intellectually, but a lived possibility to be realized experientially. When you consciously let go of a resentment you have been feeding and nurturing for months or years, you feel the immediate relief and lightness in your body. When you finally stop demanding insistently that this present moment be different than it actually is, peace arrives naturally without any announcement or fanfare. When you release the endless stories about who you should be according to society, family, or your own harsh inner critic, and simply inhabit fully who you actually are right now, spaciousness opens miraculously. This is practical Dharma in action, removing the arrow skillfully rather than endlessly analyzing its trajectory, composition, and origin while you bleed. Thich Nhat Hanh, the beloved Vietnamese monk and peace activist who touched millions of lives, taught consistently that the practice is always about coming home fully to the present moment. He said with profound simplicity, "The present moment is the only time over which we have any dominion. The past is already gone forever, existing only as memory traces. The future has not yet arrived and may never come as we imagine." When we are fully present with our whole being, body and mind united, we touch what he called the ultimate dimension, the reality that is always available beneath and beyond our constant conceptual thinking. This is not abstract philosophy, but direct experience, tasting the water directly, rather than reading elaborate descriptions of its molecular structure. It is immediate, intimate, and undeniable. The teaching of the poisoned arrow also reveals something important about the nature of skillful questions versus unskillful ones. Not all inquiries lead toward genuine liberation and freedom. Some questions, perhaps most, are sophisticated avoidance mechanisms, clever ways to stay safely in the comfortable realm of abstract concepts, rather than face the messy, uncomfortable work of actual transformation. The Buddha actively encouraged questions that lead directly to disenchantment with suffering, to dispassion toward compulsive desires, to cessation of craving, to peace that surpasses understanding, to direct knowledge beyond concepts, to awakening of our true nature, to nirvana, the complete extinction of the fires of greed, hatred, and delusion. He gently but firmly discouraged questions that lead nowhere except to more questions, endless loops of speculation that never touch actual lived experience. Consider honestly your own spiritual journey up to this moment. Are you genuinely seeking understanding that leads to tangible freedom and peace? Or are you primarily collecting interesting ideas and concepts that make you feel spiritually sophisticated and special? There is a profound difference between wisdom and mere information. Wisdom fundamentally changes how you actually live, how you treat yourself and others, how you respond to difficulty and joy. Information merely changes what you know intellectually, adding to your mental database without transforming your heart. The Buddha offered wisdom, a path to be walked with the feet and heart, to be lived fully, not just contemplated comfortably by the detached intellect. He invited direct experimentation. See clearly for yourself if letting go of anger brings genuine relief, if compassion softens your painful isolation, if mindfulness clarifies your choices. This teaching is sometimes called the doctrine of the undeclared questions in Buddhist philosophy. The Buddha remained intentionally silent on certain metaphysical points, not because he lacked answers or was uncertain, but because providing those answers would not serve the goal of liberation from suffering. In some cases, his silence itself became a powerful teaching, a clear reminder that not every question deserves our precious time and energy. Some doors are genuinely best left closed, so we can walk directly through the ones that lead to actual gardens of peace and wisdom, rather than more endless hallways of abstract speculation and conceptual confusion. Choose your questions wisely. The noble eightfold path that the Buddha taught Malankya-Putta that transformative night under the stars is entirely practical and immediately applicable. Right view or understanding, right intention or resolve, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness or awareness, right concentration or meditation. These are not lofty, abstract ideals floating impossibly beyond reach, but trainable skills you can develop methodically. You can practice them starting today, right now, in small ways. You can refine them carefully over an entire lifetime, deepening and maturing your practice. They address the arrow of suffering directly and specifically, each element working together synergistically to extract the poison of craving, aversion, and delusion that contaminates our experience. As we move forward through these remaining stories with open hearts and minds, remember clearly the central lesson of the poisoned arrow. The Buddha's teachings are primarily tools for liberation, not topics for endless intellectual debate or philosophical speculation. They are meant to be lived fully, tested carefully in experience, embodied completely in how you treat yourself and others. Your own direct experience is ultimately the highest authority, more trustworthy than any text or teacher. Notice carefully what actually brings lasting peace and what perpetuates struggle and suffering. Choose consciously the medicine that genuinely heals, rather than the discussion that merely entertains. Let the unnecessary questions fall away naturally, like autumn leaves in the wind, making space for the practice that actually transforms your life. We continue now to the next story, where the Buddha teaches about the extraordinary power of unwavering attention. The bowl of oil. In a time when the Buddha walked this earth teaching the Dharma, there lived a wealthy king who loved elaborate festivals and spectacular entertainment. He announced a grand celebration in his capital city, with skilled dancers and talented musicians filling every street from dawn until nightfall, acrobats performing seemingly impossible feats that defied gravity and logic, and vendors selling exotic delicacies from distant lands across the seas. The entire population of the city gathered eagerly in their finest clothes, intoxicated by brilliant color and enchanting sound and the collective joy of forgetting their ordinary lives and worries for one glorious, carefree day. The streets overflowed with humanity. Laughter echoed from every corner, and the air itself seemed to vibrate with excitement and possibility. It was the kind of day people would remember and talk about for years afterward. The Buddha, teaching nearby in a quiet grove just outside the city walls, decided to use this festival to illustrate a profound truth about the nature of attention and concentration in spiritual practice. He called his monks together one morning and presented them with what seemed like a simple challenge, but contained layers of meaning. He summoned a young woman from a nearby village, a potter's daughter well known in the area for her steady hands, calm demeanor, and remarkable ability to remain composed under pressure. She had been recommended by several villagers as someone unusually focused and balanced. He gave her a large clay bowl, beautifully crafted and polished smooth, filled absolutely to the very brim with pure golden sesame oil. The bowl was so completely full that the surface tension held the liquid in a perfect trembling dome that rose slightly above the rim. defying gravity through molecular forces. One small jostle would break that tension and spill the precious oil. The Buddha explained the task clearly so everyone present understood exactly what was required. This woman must carry the bowl carefully through the entire festival, walking slowly and steadily from one end of the crowded, chaotic city to the opposite end without spilling even a single drop of oil. She must navigate skillfully through the dense crush of excited bodies, the sudden, unpredictable movements of children darting about, the constant jostling and pushing of the thick crowd pressed together. The bowl must remain perfectly level despite the chaos surrounding her on all sides. The monks watched with great interest, wondering curiously what lesson their wise teacher intended to convey through this unusual demonstration. Surely there was deeper meaning here than simply a test of physical balance and steady hands. The Buddha always taught through stories and examples that revealed truths about consciousness and liberation. Then the Buddha added the final element, the crucial detail that transformed this task from a mere physical challenge into something else entirely, something that would test the very depths of her concentration and presence. He appointed a strong soldier carrying a sharp, gleaming sword to walk directly behind the woman at every single step of her journey through the festival. The warrior received absolutely clear instructions in front of all the assembled monks and villagers. If she spills even one single drop of oil, even the smallest amount, you will immediately strike off her head without hesitation or mercy. The woman heard these words clearly, and her face became very still and composed, all casual emotion draining away. The festival noise seemed to dim and recede into the background. Everything in her awareness sharpened into singular focus. This was no longer a game or demonstration, but a matter of life and death. Her next hours would require every ounce of attention she possessed. She lifted the bowl carefully with both hands, feeling precisely its weight, its fullness, the way the oil wanted naturally to slosh and ripple with any movement. She took her first experimental step, then another, finding her rhythm and balance. The soldier moved into position behind her, his blade catching and reflecting the bright sunlight in flashes. She took a deep breath, centering herself completely, and entered the festival crowd. All around her immediately, people laughed loudly and shouted to friends and surged forward toward the various performers and attractions. A juggler tossed flaming torches high into the air just beside her narrow path, the heat briefly touching her face. Musicians pounded large drums that shook the ground beneath her feet, threatening her balance. Dancers whirled wildly in elaborate, colorful costumes, their movements joyful and abandoned and unpredictable, sometimes coming dangerously close to her steady progress through the chaos. But the woman saw absolutely none of it, none of the spectacle designed to capture attention and dazzle the senses. Her entire being, body and mind and spirit, contracted into a single point of laser-like awareness. The golden surface of the oil in the bowl she carried so carefully. Each step became a meditation in itself, a universe of attention. Each breath served as an anchor, keeping her grounded in the present moment. Her eyes softened their focus, but remained utterly concentrated on the task, aware of everything in her peripheral vision, but attached to nothing. When someone accidentally bumped her shoulder hard in the crowd, she adjusted smoothly and naturally without conscious thought, her body responding with fluid intelligence before her thinking mind could panic or react. The sword walking behind her became a strange kind of grace, sharpening her attention to an absolute diamond edge that could not be dulled or distracted. She walked for more than an hour through streets specifically designed to overwhelm the senses and scatter attention in 1,000 directions. Vendors called out their wares loudly, competing for customer attention. Children darted suddenly between her legs, chasing colorful ribbons and each other. A large elephant, magnificently decorated for the festival with painted designs and silk cloth, lumbered past so close she could feel its warmth and smell its distinctive breath. Musicians played intoxicating rhythms meant to make the body move involuntarily. Acrobats performed stunts that made crowds gasp and cheer. Beautiful dancers moved with hypnotic grace. Yet she remained completely absorbed in her singular task, matching her breath consciously to her steps, feeling the subtle weight shifts in the bowl with extraordinary sensitivity, making continuous micro-adjustments to keep it perfectly level. The oil's surface barely trembled, even as she navigated through the density and chaos. At last, she reached the far gate of the city where the festival ended, and quiet countryside began. The Buddha waited there patiently with his monks, having walked the long way around outside the city walls. She stopped before him, and the bowl was still completely full to the brim, not a single drop darkening the dust at her feet. She set the bowl down with infinite care and gentleness, and only then did she seem to return gradually from wherever her deep concentration had taken her consciousness. Her hands were perfectly steady despite the ordeal. Her breath was calm and even. The soldier sheathed his sword with a metallic sound and bowed deeply to her with genuine respect, recognizing clearly that he had just witnessed something extraordinary and rare, a demonstration of concentration most people never achieve in their entire lives. The Buddha turned to his assembled monks with a gentle, knowing smile. "Tell me honestly," he said, "did this woman see the beautiful dancers performing their art? Did she hear the skilled musicians playing their instruments? Did she watch the amazing acrobats defying death, or admire the elaborate decorations hanging everywhere?" The monks shook their heads slowly. "No, venerable teacher, she saw absolutely none of it. Her attention was completely absorbed in the task directly before her, the bowl and the oil. Her very life depended utterly on her focus, so she gave it completely without reservation or division. Nothing could distract her even slightly when the consequences were so absolute. The festival might as well not have existed for her. She was alone with her task." "Exactly so," the Buddha replied with satisfaction. "This is precisely how you must approach your practice, how you must train your minds. When you sit in formal meditation, when you walk in mindfulness, when you carefully observe the arising and passing away of sensations in your body, give your attention as completely and totally as this remarkable woman gave hers today. Let the endless distractions of the world be as nothing compared to the crucial task of liberation from suffering. Your spiritual life, your freedom, depends entirely on this quality of unwavering focus and presence. Samsara, the endless cycle of birth and death, is the festival all around you, designed to capture and scatter your attention. Your practice is the bowl of oil you must carry without spilling. The sword of impermanence and death walks silently behind you always, every moment. Do not carelessly spill your precious attention on what does not lead to freedom. This is the profound teaching of the bowl of oil. Understanding the bowl of oil. The parable of the bowl of oil teaches us about samadhi, the profound concentration and unification of mind that is essential for deep spiritual transformation and liberation. Samadhi is not merely focusing hard on something while gritting your teeth with effort, but rather a natural gathering of attention into a single pointed flow, like many streams merging into one powerful river. When the mind achieves true samadhi, it becomes still like a mountain lake at dawn, reflecting reality without distortion or agitation. This quality of concentration is one of the 3 trainings in Buddhism, along with ethical conduct and wisdom, and without it the other 2 cannot fully develop. The woman with the oil bowl demonstrated perfect samadhi, her attention undivided despite extraordinary external temptation and distraction. Her life depended on it, and this urgency created the conditions for complete presence. In our ordinary lives, our attention is scattered like leaves in the wind, constantly pulled in countless directions by desires, fears, memories, plans, and the endless stimulation of modern existence. We think we are paying attention to what we are doing, but actually, we are only giving a small fraction of our awareness to the present task, while the rest churns through commentary, judgment, fantasy, and worry. We eat dinner while watching television and scrolling on our phones, tasting nothing. We talk to loved ones while mentally composing emails or replaying earlier conversations. We drive familiar routes and arrive with no memory of the journey because we were completely lost in thought. This scattered attention creates a life that feels vague, unsatisfying, and somehow unreal, as if we are always somewhere else, never quite here. The Buddha taught that this scattering of attention is not just an inconvenience, but a fundamental source of suffering and delusion. When attention is divided and weak, we cannot see things as they truly are. We see instead through the distorting filters of our habits, assumptions, and reactive patterns. We miss the subtle truth of impermanence because we are not present long enough to notice anything arising or passing. We miss the truth of non-self because we are too busy spinning stories about who we think we are. We miss the possibility of peace because our attention is always chasing after the next thing, never settling into what is actually here. Scattered attention means scattered life, fragmented experience, and the constant low-grade suffering of feeling disconnected from our own existence. Sati, often translated as mindfulness or awareness, is the quality of remembering to be present, of coming back again and again to direct experience. But sati alone is not enough without samadhi to sustain it. You can remember to be present, but if your concentration is weak, you will be pulled away again within seconds by the powerful currents of habit and distraction. Samadhi provides the stability and power that allows sati to deepen and mature. Together they form a partnership, mindfulness directing where attention goes, concentration holding it there steadily. The woman carrying the oil demonstrated both. She remembered her task continuously, and her concentration never wavered. The sword behind her symbolizes what in Buddhism we call samvega, the spiritual urgency that comes from truly understanding impermanence and death. Shunryu Suzuki Roshi, the Japanese Zen master who brought Zen practice to America and founded the San Francisco Zen Center, taught beautifully about what he called beginner's mind or shoshin. He said that in the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind, there are few. When we approach practice with beginner's mind, we are open, curious, and fully present, not assuming we already know what will happen. The woman with the oil bowl, despite perhaps having carried many things before, approached this task with absolute freshness and attention because the stakes were completely new. She could not rely on habit or assume anything. Each step required total presence, and this is how we must approach our meditation practice. Each breath as if it is the first breath, each moment completely new. The festival in the story represents the endless seductions of samsara, the cycle of conditioned existence that keeps us hypnotized and distracted from what truly matters. Modern life has become an increasingly overwhelming festival, with technology companies employing teams of psychologists to make their products as addictive and attention-capturing as possible. We live in an attention economy where our focus is the commodity being bought and sold, and we are hemorrhaging this precious resource without even realizing it. Social media, news cycles, entertainment, shopping, the constant bombardment of images and messages, all of it designed to capture and hold our awareness. We are like the festival crowd, intoxicated by stimulation, forgetting completely the bowl we are meant to be carrying, the precious human life we are meant to be living with awareness and intention. The Buddha is asking us a crucial question through this parable. What is your bowl of oil? What is the one thing that truly matters, the task that your spiritual life depends upon? For practitioners, it is the cultivation of awareness, the development of wisdom and compassion, the liberation from suffering. Everything else, no matter how entertaining or seemingly important, is ultimately the festival, distraction from what will matter when death arrives. The sword walking behind us is not metaphorical. Death is always present, always approaching, though we usually manage to forget this uncomfortable truth. Every breath could be our last. Every day is one day closer to the end of this particular life. This is not meant to create fear or morbidity, but to instill urgency and clarity about priorities. When we truly understand impermanency and death, not just intellectually, but in our bones, our practice naturally intensifies. We stop wasting time on trivial pursuits and endless distraction. We stop postponing what matters, assuming we will get to it later when life is less busy or complicated. We recognize that now is all we have, this breath, this step, this moment of consciousness. The woman carried the oil with total attention because she understood viscerally that her life depended on it. Our spiritual life depends on our attention in exactly the same way. Without the oil of concentrated awareness, we cannot progress on the path. We remain scattered, reactive, and trapped in unconscious patterns that perpetuate suffering for ourselves and others around us. The teaching also reveals something profound about capacity. Most of us believe we cannot concentrate deeply, that our minds are too restless, too undisciplined, too damaged by modern life. But the truth is that when something truly matters to us, when the stakes are high enough, we find reserves of attention we did not know existed. A mother with a sick child can stay awake for days, completely focused on care. An artist lost in creation can work for hours without noticing hunger or fatigue. A person facing a genuine crisis becomes extraordinarily present and clear. The capacity for deep concentration is inherent in human consciousness. We simply need the right conditions and sufficient motivation to access it. Practice creates those conditions gradually, training the mind like we train the body, building strength and flexibility through repeated effort. As we continue our journey through these stories, consider your own relationship with attention and concentration. How often are you truly present, giving your full awareness to what you are doing? How much of your life passes by unseen because you are lost in thought or distraction? What would change if you approached each day, each interaction, each moment with the quality of attention the woman gave to her bowl? The Buddha offers us this teaching not to make us feel inadequate, but to show us what is possible. The extraordinary clarity and peace that comes from training the mind to be present, stable, and concentrated. This is not a supernatural ability reserved for mystics, but a natural human capacity waiting to be developed through patient practice. Let us carry forward this teaching as we explore the next story about compassion and skillful means. The burning house. In ancient India, there lived a wealthy merchant who owned a large, magnificent house filled with treasures collected over a lifetime of successful trading. The house was very old, built generations before by his ancestors, with wooden beams and thatch roofing that had dried and weathered over decades. One afternoon, while the merchant was in his garden, a fire started inside the house, perhaps from a cooking flame or an oil lamp knocked over. No one ever knew for certain. The flames spread quickly through the dry wood, feeding hungrily on everything they touched, growing from small flickering to roaring inferno within minutes. Black smoke billowed from windows and gaps in the roof, and the crackling sound of destruction grew louder with each passing moment. The merchant's children, 5 young boys ranging from perhaps 4 to 12 years old, were playing inside the house when the fire began. They were completely absorbed in their games in a back room, playing with toy carts and animals, building imaginary kingdoms, lost in the vivid world of childhood imagination. They did not notice the first wisps of smoke curling under the doorway. They did not hear the initial crackling of flames in distant rooms. The house was large and they were far from where the fire started, giving them precious minutes, but also delaying their awareness of the mortal danger surrounding them. They laughed and played, pushing their toy carts, making the sounds of horses and oxen, completely innocent of the disaster unfolding around them. The merchant, seeing smoke pouring from his house, ran immediately toward the entrance, his heart seized with terror for his children inside. He reached the doorway and shouted their names urgently, commanding them to come out immediately. But the children, hearing his distant voice, barely looked up from their games. "Father is calling," one said absently, "but we are busy right now with our game." "Come see what we have built," another shouted back. They had no concept of fire, no understanding of danger, no experience that would make them grasp the urgency in their father's voice. To them, his calls were just another adult interruption of their important play. They saw no flames from their room yet, smelled no smoke, felt no heat. Everything seemed normal in their limited awareness and experience. The merchant, standing at the doorway, faced a terrible dilemma. He could rush in and try to physically carry them out, but the house was large and he was only one person. By the time he reached them through the spreading flames and smoke, carried one child out, and returned for the others, some might already have perished. The fire was spreading too quickly, blocking hallways, consuming rooms. He could continue shouting commands and warnings, but they were clearly not responding to abstract danger they could not see or understand. Their innocent ignorance was about to kill them. He felt panic rising but forced himself to think clearly. How could he make them come out immediately when they did not understand the danger? What would motivate them to move when commands failed? Then an idea came to him, born of deep love and desperate creativity. He knew his children and what delighted them. He knew what they had been begging him to bring from his travels. He called out in a voice bright with excitement rather than fear, "Children, come out quickly. I have wonderful gifts for you. I have brought you the most amazing toy carts you have ever seen, drawn by goats and deer and oxen, each one specially made just for you, much better than the old toys you are playing with now. They are right here outside waiting. Come quickly and see." His voice carried joy and promise rather than terror, speaking their language, meeting them where they were in consciousness and understanding. The children's heads snapped up immediately. New toys? Special carts? Better than what we have? They dropped their old toys without a second thought and ran toward their father's voice, suddenly urgent, competing with each other to be first to see these wonderful gifts. They ran through rooms now filling with smoke, past flames they barely noticed in their excitement, focused completely on the promised treasures. They burst out through the doorway into their father's arms, coughing and confused as their eyes adjusted to daylight. The merchant swept them away from the burning house, holding them tightly, tears of relief streaming down his face. Behind them, the house groaned and collapsed in a shower of sparks and flame, consumed completely. They were safe, every single one, saved from certain death. The children, now at safe distance, looked at their father expectantly. "Where are the amazing toy carts you promised, Father? We came out as you asked, now show us the gifts." The merchant looked at his children, dirty with soot, but alive and safe, and felt overwhelming love. He smiled and said gently, "Come with me to the market. I will buy you not toy carts, but real carts, full-sized, drawn by actual animals, even more wonderful than I described. You will have everything I promised, and more." The children cheered and danced, delighted, already forgetting the house and fire in their excitement about future gifts. They did not yet understand that their father had saved their lives using the only means that would work, speaking in language they could hear, offering what they could value. The Buddha told this story to his disciples to explain the nature of his teaching and the methods he used to help beings escape suffering. The burning house, he explained, is samsara, the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth fueled by ignorance and craving. All beings are trapped inside, but most are like the children, unaware of the danger, absorbed in temporary pleasures and games, not hearing the warnings of teachers and wise ones. They cannot perceive impermanence, suffering, and death as immediate realities. These truths seem abstract and distant. They are busy with their lives, their desires, their projects, their dramas, seeing no urgent need to practice or change. The Buddha, like the Father, uses skillful means, what in Sanskrit is called upaya, to motivate people to move towards safety and liberation. He teaches different practices to different people based on their capacity, interests, and level of understanding. To some, he teaches generosity and ethical conduct. To others, he teaches meditation and mindfulness. To some, he reveals deep philosophical truths about emptiness and interdependence. Each teaching is like a different toy cart offered to lure beings out of the burning house of suffering. The teachings adapt to the student while pointing toward the same ultimate safety, the same liberation, the same freedom from the fires of greed, hatred, and delusion that consume unaware lives. The children did not understand fire and death, but they understood desire for toys. So the Father used their desire skillfully to save their lives. Similarly, we may not initially understand nirvana or enlightenment. These words are abstract and meaningless to most people beginning spiritual practice, but we understand suffering, stress, anxiety, and the desire for peace and happiness. So the Buddha offers teachings that speak to these experiences, promising relief, offering methods that address our actual condition. Later, when we are safe from immediate danger, he reveals deeper truths. The toy carts were expedient means, skillfully adapted lies that pointed toward truth and served liberation. This is the profound compassion of upaya. Let us reflect together on what this burning house reveals about wisdom, compassion, and the nature of teaching. The Buddha does not stand outside the burning house, shouting abstract philosophical truths to people who cannot hear or understand. He enters into relationship, understands each person's situation, and offers exactly what will help them take the next step toward freedom. This is the way of compassionate wisdom, meeting beings where they are, speaking languages they can hear, using whatever skillful means will lead toward awakening. The house burns whether we acknowledge it or not. The question is whether we will respond to the invitation to step out into safety, into the fresh air of awareness and liberation. Understanding the burning house. The parable of the burning house is one of the most famous teachings from the Lotus Sutra, one of the most influential texts in Mahayana Buddhism. It illustrates the profound concept of upaya, skillful means, which recognizes that truth must be communicated in ways appropriate to the listener's capacity and situation. Not everyone can hear the same teaching in the same way. A teaching that liberates one person might confuse or alienate another. A practice perfect for someone with years of training might overwhelm a beginner. Wisdom is not just knowing truth, but knowing how to share truth effectively, how to help others discover it for themselves. The Buddha was not just enlightened. He was an extraordinarily skillful teacher who adapted his methods constantly to serve the liberation of all beings without exception. The burning house represents samsara, and this is not merely poetic metaphor, but direct description of our actual situation according to Buddhist understanding. Samsara is the endless cycle of birth, aging, sickness, death, and rebirth, driven by ignorance, craving, and karma. Within this cycle, we experience temporary pleasures, yes, like children enjoying their games, but we are always subject to change, loss, disappointment, and suffering. Everything we cling to eventually changes or disappears. Everyone we love will be separated from us by death, if not before. Our own bodies age and fail. Our minds create endless scenarios of worry and regret. We are literally surrounded by the fires of greed, the fires of hatred, and the fires of delusion. The three poisons that burn constantly, consuming our peace and possibility. Yet like the children in the story, most people do not perceive this danger as immediate or urgent. We know intellectually that we will die someday, but this knowledge remains abstract, something that happens to other people or to our future selves, not to us right now. We know that clinging causes suffering, but we continue clinging to relationships, possessions, identities, opinions, believing somehow that our clinging will be the exception, that what we grasp will not slip away. We know that anger harms us, but we justify our anger as righteous, deserved, necessary. We are absorbed in our games, our pursuits, our dramas, not hearing the urgent voice calling us to wake up and step out of danger into freedom and clear seeing. Avidya, fundamental ignorance, is the root poison that keeps us playing in the burning house unaware. Avidya is not mere lack of information, but active misperception of reality. We see permanent what is actually impermanent. We see self where there is actually a process without fixed essence. We see satisfying what is actually unsatisfying when clung to. This ignorance is not our fault. It is conditioned into us by evolution, culture, language, and habit. Our brains evolved to create a sense of solid, continuing self because that aided survival. Our cultures teach us to identify with nationality, religion, family, roles. Our language reinforces dualistic thinking, subject and object, self and other. We inherit this ignorance like children born into a burning house built by previous generations. We did not start the fire, but we are nevertheless in danger. The Buddha's compassion is demonstrated by his refusal to simply declare abstract truths and leave us to figure out how to respond. He could have stood outside samsara, so to speak, and shouted, "All conditioned phenomena are impermanent. There is no self. Nirvana is the unconditioned." These statements are true according to Buddhist philosophy, but to most people they are meaningless sounds, words without reference in direct experience. They do not motivate change or practice. They do not address the lived reality of suffering. So instead, the Buddha offers practices and teachings calibrated to where people actually are, what they can actually hear and work with, given their current level of understanding and development. This is the essence of skillful means. To those motivated primarily by pleasure and pain, he teaches karma and rebirth, showing how ethical conduct leads to happiness and unethical conduct leads to suffering in future lives. This teaching uses desire and fear, which such people already have, to motivate moral behavior and create conditions for deeper practice. To those capable of renunciation, he teaches the Four Noble Truths and the path to personal liberation from suffering. To those with bodhisattva aspiration, those who want to help all beings, he teaches the paramitas, the perfections of generosity, ethics, patience, effort, meditation, and wisdom. Each teaching is a different cart offered to different children, adapted to their capacities, while pointing toward the same ultimate liberation from the burning house. The Buddha himself said explicitly in various sutras that he taught differently according to circumstance. To the sick, he emphasized healing practices. To the grieving, he taught impermanence and letting go. To the angry, he taught loving kindness meditation. To the confused, he taught clear seeing and investigation. To the doubtful, he offered logical reasoning and investigation. To the faithful, he offered devotional practices and inspiration. This flexibility was not inconsistency or deception, but profound wisdom and compassion. He was like a skilled physician who prescribes different medicines for different illnesses, always with the goal of restoring health, always adapting treatment to the specific patient's condition and constitution. The destination is the same, freedom from suffering, but the paths are many. The question naturally arises, if the Buddha used skillful means, even what the story calls expedient lies about the toy carts, can we trust any of the teachings? Is it all just manipulation? This misunderstands Upaya completely. The father's promise was not ultimately a lie because he did give his children real carts, even better than he described. The temporary teaching was transcended and fulfilled by something greater. Similarly, the Buddha's various teachings, even when later revealed as provisional, are not false, but incomplete, stepping stones toward fuller understanding. The teaching of self might be useful at one stage to establish moral responsibility. Then the teaching of no self becomes useful to dissolve grasping and identification. Both are true from different perspectives, and both serve liberation when applied skillfully at the right time. Upaya requires wisdom to know what teaching is appropriate, and also deep compassion that motivates the effort to help others. The merchant father could have given up on his children, thinking, "They will not listen, they are too ignorant, let them burn while I save myself." This would have been the response of someone without love. Or he could have forcefully dragged them out against their will, traumatizing them, making them resent his interference. This would have been the response of someone without wisdom. Instead, he found the middle way, respecting their freedom and working with their actual motivations while guiding them towards safety. This is how the Buddha works with us, respecting our freedom, working with our actual condition, gradually guiding us toward recognition of truth and freedom from suffering. The teaching encourages us as practitioners to develop both wisdom and skillful means in our own interactions. How do we share Dharma with family members who are not interested in Buddhism? How do we help friends who are suffering but resist spiritual practice? We cannot force anyone to wake up or practice, but we can embody the teachings, demonstrate their fruits in our own increased peace and compassion, and offer what might be helpful when opportunities arise. We can learn to speak many languages, meeting people where they are, planting seeds that might sprout later when conditions are right. This is the Bodhisattva path, finding ways to serve awakening in all beings through whatever means are effective and appropriate. As we move forward, let us remember that the house is still burning, impermanence is still operating, death is still approaching, suffering is still present. But the door is open, and the Buddha stands there with infinite patience, calling us to safety, offering whatever teaching we need to take the next step. Whether we respond to promises of peace, fear of suffering, love of wisdom, or desire to help others, all these motivations can lead us out of the burning house if we actually move, if we actually practice. The time to step out is now, not later when conditions are perfect or when we finally understand everything completely. Now, with this breath, this moment of awareness, the fresh air of liberation awaits just outside the door. Let us explore the next story about facing the reality of death and impermanence with open eyes and hearts. The mustard seed. There lived in the time of the Buddha a young woman named Kisa Gotami, which means the frail one, named so because of her thin, delicate build. She was born into a poor family and grew up with few privileges or comforts, but she was kind-hearted and carried herself with quiet dignity despite her circumstances. When she came of age, she married and moved to her husband's family home, as was the custom. There she was treated poorly by her mother-in-law and other relatives who looked down on her because of her poverty and slight stature. They gave her the hardest chores, spoke to her harshly, and made her feel unwelcome in what was supposed to be her new home. She endured this treatment with patience, hoping that circumstances would improve. Then Kisa Gotami gave birth to a son, and everything changed. Suddenly she had value in the eyes of her husband's family, for she had provided them with an heir, a grandson to carry on the family line. The relatives who had treated her with contempt now treated her with respect and kindness. Her mother-in-law praised her and gave her lighter duties. Her husband looked at her with new appreciation and tenderness. The child became the center of her world, the source of all her joy and her newfound status in the household. She poured all her love into this small being, watching him grow, delighting in every smile and sound, feeling for the first time in her life truly valued and happy. The child was not just her son, but her salvation, her meaning, her entire future wrapped in small hands. For a few years life was good. The boy grew healthy and strong, beginning to walk and talk, bringing laughter into the household. Kisa Gotami's heart expanded with love she had not known she was capable of feeling. She would watch him sleep and feel overwhelmed with gratitude and fierce protective love. She began to plan his future, imagining him growing into a fine young man, marrying, giving her grandchildren, caring for her in old age. Her identity became completely wrapped up in being his mother. She thought little of spiritual matters or questions about the nature of existence. She had what she needed, this precious child, this tangible love that made sense of her life and struggles. Then, with the suddenness that characterizes all tragedy, the child became ill. Perhaps it was a fever, perhaps something he ate, perhaps a disease that swept through the village. The story does not specify. What matters is that he died, suddenly and completely, his small body going still despite all her desperate prayers and efforts. Kisa Gotami could not accept this reality. She held the dead child, rocking him, calling his name, begging him to wake up, convinced that he was merely sleeping deeply, that at any moment his eyes would open and everything would return to normal. Her mind simply refused to register what had happened. This could not be real. This could not be her life, not after she had finally found happiness. She carried the dead child from house to house throughout the village, knocking on doors, asking if anyone had medicine to cure her son. The villagers looked at her with pity and fear, recognizing the madness of grief. "She does not understand he is dead," they whispered to each other. "Someone needs to help her accept this." But who could reach her in the depths of her denial and anguish? Finally, someone suggested, "Take the child to the Buddha who is teaching in the grove outside the village. If anyone has medicine for death, it would be him. He is said to be supremely wise and compassionate. Perhaps he can help her." So Kisa Gotami, carrying her dead son, made her way to where the Buddha sat beneath a tree, surrounded by monks and lay people listening to his teaching. She approached the Buddha and placed the child at his feet. "Great teacher," she said, "I have heard that you have powerful medicine and great wisdom. Please, I beg you, give me the medicine that will cure my son. He is sick and will not wake." The Buddha looked at her with infinite compassion, seeing clearly her suffering, her confusion, her desperate hope. He did not tell her directly that her child was dead and that she needed to accept this. He knew she could not hear such words yet. Her mind would reject them violently. Instead, he said gently, "Yes, I can help you, but I need you to bring me something first." Kisa Gotami's face lit with desperate hope. "Anything," she said. "I will bring you anything you need." The Buddha spoke calmly and clearly. "Go into the city and bring me a single mustard seed, but it must come from a household that has never experienced death. Not a family that has never lost a child, but never lost anyone. No parent, no grandparent, no sibling, no relative, no servant, no one at all. When you find this mustard seed from such a house, bring it to me, and I will prepare the medicine for your son." Kisa Gotami bowed gratefully, certain she would quickly complete this simple task. A single mustard seed, such a small thing. Surely this would be easy to find. She hurried toward the city, renewed energy in her steps, still carrying her dead son, still clinging to the hope that he could somehow be restored to her if only she followed the teacher's instructions exactly. She knocked on the door of the first large, wealthy house she came to. "Please," she said, "I need a mustard seed for medicine." The family immediately offered her their entire store of mustard seeds. "Take as much as you need," they said kindly. "But," she added, remembering the Buddha's requirement, "has anyone in this household ever died?" The family's faces grew somber. "Oh yes," the grandmother replied. "We lost our eldest son just 2 years ago, and before that, my husband's father, and before that, several uncles and aunts. Every household knows the visit of death eventually." Kisa Gotami thanked them and moved on, certain the next house would provide what she needed. This was just bad luck, one house that happened to have experienced loss. But at the next house, and the next and the next, the story was always the same. People generously offered mustard seeds, but when she asked about death, every family had a story. "We lost our daughter to illness. My brother died in an accident. Our grandfather passed last year. Our baby died at birth. Our mother died in childbirth. Our father was bitten by a snake. On and on through the day, Kisa Gautami went, knocking on door after door, rich houses and poor houses, large families and small ones, everywhere the same answer. Yes, we have mustard seeds. No, we have not been spared from death. Death has visited every house without exception. No family, no matter how wealthy or pious or fortunate, had escaped this universal experience. Capítulo 9. A semente de mostarda, o ensinamento, understanding the mustard seed. The story of Kisa Gautami and the mustard seed is one of the most powerful and heartbreaking teachings in all of Buddhist literature. It addresses directly the reality of death and loss, which every human being must eventually face, and it demonstrates the Buddha's extraordinary skill in teaching through experience rather than lecture. The Buddha could have simply told Kisa Gautami that her child was dead and that she needed to accept this fact. He could have explained philosophically that all conditioned things are impermanent and that death is natural and inevitable. But she was not in a state to hear such words. Her grief had created a wall around her awareness, and abstract truths could not penetrate. She needed to discover the truth herself through her own direct experience, and the Buddha's genius was in creating the conditions for that discovery to happen organically. By sending her to search for a mustard seed from a house untouched by death, the Buddha ensured that Kisa Gautami would encounter death over and over again in the stories of others. Each door she knocked on, each family's tale of loss, slowly wore away the walls of her denial. She began to see that her suffering was not unique or exceptional, but universal. Every mother has feared losing her child or has lost one. Every family has grieved. Every human being born will die, and those who love them will experience the tearing pain of separation. This recognition of shared suffering is the beginning of wisdom and the seed of compassion. When we realize that our pain is not ours alone, but part of the human condition, isolation begins to dissolve and connection becomes possible again. The teaching directly addresses dukkha, the first of the Four Noble Truths that the Buddha declared. Dukkha is often translated as suffering, but it means something broader: the inherent unsatisfactoriness and instability of conditioned existence. Everything that arises passes away. Everything that comes together eventually comes apart. Every meeting ends in parting, whether through choice, circumstance, or death. Every possession is eventually lost or left behind. Every body ages and fails. Every experience, no matter how pleasant, is temporary and thus cannot provide lasting satisfaction if we cling to it as permanent. This is not pessimism, but clear seeing, looking directly at the nature of reality without the comforting filters of denial and wishful thinking that usually shield us. Anicca, impermanence, is the characteristic of existence that Kisa Gautami confronted through her search. Nothing remains unchanged. The body she carried that had once been warm and alive was now cold and still. The son she had imagined growing into manhood would never age another day. The future she had planned dissolved like morning mist. Impermanence operates continuously at every level of reality, from the subatomic particles constantly appearing and vanishing to the stars slowly burning through their fuel over billions of years. We are processes, not things, patterns of change rather than solid, unchanging entities. The Buddha taught that deeply understanding impermanence leads to dispassion toward clinging and grasping, which in turn leads to liberation from suffering. We suffer primarily because we want things to be permanent that cannot be permanent. The story also reveals the universality of death and loss. In modern wealthy societies, we have largely hidden death away in hospitals and nursing homes, sanitized, and removed from daily life. Many people reach adulthood without directly witnessing death, and this creates a dangerous illusion that death is somehow optional or distant, something that happens to others but not to us or those we love. In the Buddha's time, death was far more visible. Children died frequently, women died in childbirth, men died in accidents and conflicts. Disease swept through villages regularly. Everyone had intimate experience with mortality. Yet even then, Kisa Gotami, in her shock and denial, needed to be reminded of this universal truth through encountering it again and again in others' stories until it finally penetrated her awareness. When Kisa Gotami finally returned to the Buddha, she no longer carried her son's body. At some point during her journey through the city, as the truth slowly dawned, she had taken him to the cremation ground and performed the necessary rituals, finally accepting what she had been denying. She came back to the Buddha empty-handed but somehow lighter despite her grief. She bowed before him and said, "I understand now. There is no house free from death. I am not alone in this suffering. Every person I met today carries their own losses, their own griefs." The Buddha welcomed her with great tenderness, and she asked to become his disciple, to learn the path to freedom from suffering. She eventually became an enlightened arahant, one who has completely liberated the mind from clinging and ignorance. Pema Chodron, the American Buddhist nun and teacher, who has written beautifully about working with difficulty and loss, teaches about what she calls the wisdom of no escape. She says that we spend most of our lives trying to avoid pain, discomfort, and unwanted experiences, but this very avoidance creates a kind of suffering that is worse than the pain itself. We suffer from the pain, and we suffer from resisting the pain, creating a double bind. The wisdom of no escape means recognizing that we cannot avoid the fundamental facts of existence, impermanence, suffering, death, loss. These are not punishments or mistakes, but inherent in the nature of conditioned reality. When we stop trying to escape and instead turn toward our experience with openness and courage, something shifts. The pain may still be present, but the suffering around the pain begins to ease. The teaching of the mustard seed invites us into radical acceptance, which does not mean passive resignation, but clear seeing of what is actually true. Kisa Gotami could not bring her son back to life, no matter how much she wished it or prayed or searched for medicine. Death is irreversible, at least in this form, in this life. Her choice was to remain in denial, creating immense suffering for herself, or to accept the truth and learn to carry her grief with dignity and wisdom. Acceptance allowed her to honor her son's memory, connect with others who had experienced similar loss, and eventually transform her personal pain into universal compassion. Her suffering became the doorway to awakening, rather than a prison of isolated despair. The story also teaches about tanha, craving or grasping, which the Buddha identified as the cause of suffering in the second noble truth. Kisa Gotami's attachment to her son was natural and beautiful. Love itself is not the problem. But when that love became desperate clinging, when her entire identity and happiness depended on his continued existence, when she could not accept the reality of his death, that attachment became a source of unbearable suffering. The Buddha did not teach that we should not love or care deeply. He taught that we should love without grasping, cherish without clinging, engage fully while understanding impermanence. This allows us to be present with joy when things are going well, and to grieve cleanly when loss comes, without the added suffering of denial and resistance that makes simple grief into devastating anguish. The universality of loss that Kisa Gotami discovered also plants the seeds of compassion. When we truly understand that everyone suffers, everyone experiences loss, everyone fears death, everyone has loved and lost, a natural compassion arises. We are all in this together, navigating the difficult terrain of human existence with its joys and sorrows, its meetings and partings. The person who cuts us off in traffic is dealing with their own struggles. The difficult colleague at work carries their own losses. The stranger on the street has buried loved ones and feared for their own life. This recognition softens the hard edges of judgment and isolation, creating space for genuine connection and mutual care. Compassion born from shared suffering is deeper and more authentic than pity, based on seeing ourselves as separate and superior. As we continue our journey through these teachings, we carry with us Kisa Gotami's hard-won wisdom. Death is certain. The time of death is uncertain. Everyone we love will die, or we will die first. Separation is inevitable. Everything we possess will be left behind. Every experience is temporary. These are not morbid thoughts meant to depress us, but liberating truths meant to wake us up to the preciousness and urgency of this moment, this breath, this life we are actually living right now. When we truly understand impermanence, we stop postponing what matters. We stop taking our loved ones for granted. We stop wasting our precious time on petty concerns and distractions. We live with greater presence, appreciation, and love, knowing that nothing lasts forever, and that makes each moment infinitely valuable. Let us carry this teaching forward as we explore the next story about the nature of suffering and our response to pain. Capítulo 10, a segunda flecha, a historia, the second arrow. The Buddha once gathered his monks in a quiet grove and began teaching about the nature of suffering and pain. He wanted them to understand something subtle and important, a distinction that would transform how they related to their experience. He began with a question, as he often did, inviting them to think carefully rather than passively receiving information. When an ordinary, untrained person is touched by a painful bodily feeling, he asked, "What does that person experience?" The monks considered this obvious question. "They experience pain, venerable teacher," they replied. "The body is injured or ill, and painful sensations arise. This is natural and unavoidable for beings with physical bodies subject to aging, sickness, and injury." Yes, the Buddha agreed, this is correct. But let me tell you more about what actually happens in such a moment. The Buddha continued, painting a vivid picture to make the teaching memorable and clear. When an untrained person is struck by a painful feeling, they experience not just one suffering, but two. It is as if a man walking through the forest is suddenly struck by an arrow. The arrow pierces his flesh, causing immediate sharp pain. This is the first arrow, the actual physical pain of the wound itself. This pain is real, it hurts. The nerve endings send distress signals to the brain. The body responds with inflammation and protective mechanisms. This first arrow is simply what happens when a body is injured. It is not a punishment or a moral failure, just the natural consequence of having a vulnerable physical form in a world where accidents and illness occur. No one can avoid this first arrow entirely by living long enough in a physical body. But then, the Buddha continued, while the wound from the first arrow is still fresh and painful, the person reacts to the pain with mental anguish. Why did this happen to me? This is terrible. What if it gets worse? What if I die from this wound? Who shot this arrow? This is unfair. I do not deserve this. The person's mind spins with fear, anger, anxiety, self-pity, and endless stories about the pain. This mental turmoil is like a second arrow that the person shoots into themselves. The first arrow was shot by circumstances, by the conditions of physical existence, by accident or illness or aging. But the second arrow is self-inflicted, created entirely by the mind's reaction to the first pain. And often this second arrow, the mental suffering, hurts far more and lasts far longer than the actual physical pain of the first arrow. The Buddha looked at his monks with great compassion and continued the teaching. The untrained person, struck by one arrow of physical pain, strikes themselves with a second arrow of mental suffering. They feel both the bodily pain and the mental anguish, and these two blend together so completely that they cannot distinguish between them. They think the mental suffering is caused by the physical pain, but actually much of what they experience as unbearable is their own mind's resistance and reaction. They tense against the pain, trying to push it away, which often increases the physical discomfort. They tell themselves stories about how awful this is, how unfair, how unbearable, and these stories create waves of emotional suffering that crash over them again and again. They catastrophize, imagining the worst possible outcomes. They compare their situation to others, feeling victimized and singled out by fate. Furthermore, the Buddha explained, the untrained person not only experiences both arrows, but typically becomes overwhelmed and lost in reactivity. When touched by pleasant feelings, they are overcome by lust and craving, grasping desperately to hold on to the pleasure, fearing its inevitable passing. When touched by painful feelings, they are overcome by aversion and hatred, fighting against reality, demanding that things be other than they are. When touched by neutral feelings, they are overcome by delusion and boredom, not even recognizing what they are experiencing, lost in distraction and unconsciousness. In every case, they are slaves to their reactions, tossed about by changing conditions, with no stability or peace. They live at the mercy of whatever arrow circumstances shoot at them, and they multiply their suffering endlessly with the arrows they shoot at themselves in response. But, the Buddha continued, and here his voice became even more gentle and encouraging. A well-trained person, someone who has practiced and developed wisdom and mindfulness, responds very differently to the same painful feeling. When struck by the first arrow of physical pain, they feel it fully. They do not deny it or pretend it is not happening. The pain is real, and they acknowledge this honestly, but they do not add the second arrow of mental suffering. They do not shoot themselves again with resistance, fear, anger, or catastrophic stories. They simply feel the pain as it is, bare sensation, arising in the body, changing moment by moment, without the elaborate emotional and mental overlay that usually accompanies pain. The trained person understands deeply that physical pain is part of having a body, just as physical pleasure is also part of having a body. Neither is permanent, neither defines who they ultimately are. The pain arises due to conditions, and it will pass away when conditions change. They do not take the pain personally. They do not ask, "Why me?" They understand that bodies are vulnerable, that illness and injury are natural parts of existence, not personal punishments or cosmic mistakes. This understanding creates space around the pain. The sensation is still there, still unpleasant, but there is breathing room, awareness that is larger than the pain, stability that is not shaken by changing sensations. The person remains present with the pain rather than fragmenting into panic and resistance. The Buddha used another image to clarify this teaching. Imagine, he said, that someone takes a small amount of salt and puts it into a cup of water. the water becomes very salty, almost undrinkable, overwhelmed by the salt. But if someone takes that same amount of salt and puts it into a great river, the river's taste does not change at all. The salt dissolves harmlessly into the vast flow of water. The salt represents the painful experience, the first arrow. The cup represents the small, contracted sense of self of the untrained person who takes everything personally and has no space in consciousness for difficult experiences. The river represents the vast, spacious awareness of the trained person who can hold difficult experiences without being overwhelmed or defined by them. When pain arises in the vast river of awareness, it is still noticed, still felt, but it does not poison the entire experience of being alive. The person can have physical pain and still feel grateful for other aspects of life. They can be sick and still offer kindness to others. They can be dying and still rest in peace. This is not because they are superhuman or have transcended the body, but because they have trained the mind to not add unnecessary suffering to the inevitable difficulties of existence. They have learned to distinguish the first arrow from the second, and they have learned to not shoot that second arrow at themselves through resistance, aversion, and the stories the mind creates about pain. The monks listened carefully to this teaching, understanding its profound implications for practice. One monk asked, "Venerable teacher, how do we train ourselves to not shoot the second arrow? How do we stop the automatic reaction of resistance and fear when pain arises?" The Buddha smiled, appreciating the sincerity of the question. "Through mindfulness," he replied. "Through patient, continuous observation of your actual experience. When pain arises, physical or emotional, notice it clearly. Notice the bare sensation or feeling. Then notice what your mind does with that sensation. Does it start telling stories? Does it tense and resist? Does it spiral into fear? Can you see the difference between the pain itself and your reaction to the pain? This seeing is the beginning of freedom. This is wisdom arising." The Buddha concluded this teaching by emphasizing that he was not asking anyone to suppress their reactions or pretend pain does not hurt. The path is not about becoming cold or indifferent, not about denying our humanity or our vulnerability. Rather, it is about understanding the mechanism of suffering so clearly that we naturally stop creating unnecessary additional pain. When we see that the second arrow is optional, that mental suffering is created by our own minds through resistance and stories, we become interested in putting down that bow, in responding to difficulty with wisdom and equanimity rather than panic and aversion. This is the middle way, feeling fully without being overwhelmed, responding to life skillfully rather than reacting unconsciously. Let the first arrow be what it is, unavoidable given the conditions of physical existence, but do not strike yourself again with the second arrow of mental anguish. Capítulo 11. A segunda flecha. O ensinamento. Understanding the second arrow. The teaching of the two arrows is extraordinarily practical and immediately applicable to our lives. It gives us a framework for understanding our experience and a clear direction for practice. The distinction between pain and suffering is crucial. Pain is inevitable. It is part of having a body and a sensitive nervous system in a world where things sometimes go wrong. We will experience physical pain from injury, illness, and aging. We will experience emotional pain from loss, disappointment, and the difficulties of being in relationship with other imperfect humans. This is the first arrow, the arrow we cannot entirely avoid through any amount of spiritual practice or positive thinking. To be alive is to be vulnerable, and vulnerability means we will sometimes be hurt. This is not a flaw in the universe, but simply the nature of conditioned existence. Suffering, however, is largely optional, created by our resistance to and stories about the pain. This is the radical and liberating insight of the second arrow teaching. When pain arises, we have a choice about how we relate to it, though this choice only becomes available when we have trained ourselves to see clearly what is happening in the moment. The untrained mind reacts automatically to pain with tightening, with pushing away, with elaborate narratives about unfairness and catastrophe. The trained mind observes pain arising, recognizes it as impermanent sensation, and creates space around it rather than collapsing into identification with the pain. This is not easy. It requires dedicated practice, but it is possible, as countless practitioners throughout history have demonstrated through their own experience and transformation. Upekkha, equanimity, is the quality of mind that allows us to be with difficulty without being overwhelmed or reactive. Equanimity is often misunderstood as indifference or cold detachment, but this is completely wrong. True equanimity is warm, spacious, and deeply caring. It is the ability to remain present with whatever is arising without grasping at the pleasant, pushing away the unpleasant, or spacing out into the neutral. It is balance, composure, and inner stability that comes from understanding impermanence deeply. When we truly know in our bones that everything changes, that this pain will also change, that no state is permanent, we can relax our frantic efforts to control experience and instead simply be present with what is actually happening right now. The teaching of two arrows helps us understand the Buddhist concept of the end of suffering more accurately. Some people misunderstand Buddhism as promising a life free from all difficulty, as if enlightened beings float above the messy reality of physical existence. This is not what the Buddha taught. He taught the end of dukkha, of the unsatisfactoriness and mental anguish we create through craving, aversion, and ignorance. Enlightened beings still experience the first arrow. Their bodies still age and get sick. They still feel pain when injured. But they do not add the second arrow. They do not create mental suffering around the pain. They experience pain but not suffering. This is a crucial and liberating distinction. Freedom is not escape from life, but a transformed relationship to life. Jack Kornfield, the American Buddhist teacher and psychologist who has helped bring Buddhist practice to Western audiences, often teaches about the difference between pain and suffering using this exact parable. He emphasizes that much of our suffering comes from the stories we tell ourselves about our experience rather than the experience itself. A physical sensation of tightness in the chest is just sensation until the mind adds the story, I am having a heart attack, I am going to die, this is terrible. An emotion of sadness is just emotion until the mind adds, I should not feel this way, there is something wrong with me, this will never end. The stories create suffering, amplifying and extending the pain far beyond its natural duration. Kornfield also points out that we can learn to recognize the second arrow as it is happening, and this recognition itself begins to dissolve it. When we notice that we are telling ourselves a catastrophic story about a pain, and we see clearly that this story is optional rather than true, we have created space. We might say to ourselves gently, this is the story about how terrible this is. But what is my actual experience right now in this moment? When we drop beneath the story to the bare sensation, we often find that the reality is more workable than the story suggested. The pain may still be unpleasant, but it is not the unbearable catastrophe the mind was making it out to be. It is simply sensation arising and passing in the vast space of awareness. The practice of working with the two arrows involves developing precise mindfulness of our experience, moment by moment. When pain arises, we train ourselves to notice it early, before the cascade of reaction has built up too much momentum. We feel the sensation itself, observing its qualities without judgment. Is it sharp or dull? Does it throb or ache or burn? Is it constant or changing? Where exactly is it located? This kind of investigation is not abstract or intellectual, but brings us into intimate contact with our actual experience. Often we discover that what we thought was one solid mass of unbearable pain is actually a collection of changing sensations, some intense and some mild, arising and passing moment by moment, rather than being one permanent solid thing. We also train ourselves to notice when the mind starts adding the second arrow, when resistance and stories begin. We might notice thoughts arising like this should not be happening, or if only I had done something differently, I could have avoided this, or this is going to ruin everything. When we see these thoughts clearly as thoughts rather than truths, we have a choice. We can continue feeding those thoughts, following them down familiar paths of mental suffering, or we can gently return attention to the bare experience, the sensation itself, the breath, the present moment. This return is not suppression. We are not pushing thoughts away, but rather we are choosing where to place our attention, choosing what to water with our awareness. We water presence rather than proliferation. The teaching also reveals something about acceptance and its relationship to change and healing. Paradoxically, when we stop fighting against pain and instead accept it as part of our present experience, the pain often diminishes or at least becomes more bearable. Resistance creates tension, and tension amplifies pain. Acceptance allows relaxation, and relaxation creates space. Moreover, acceptance allows us to respond skillfully to the pain rather than just react. If the pain is a message that something needs attention, medical care perhaps, then acceptance allows us to hear that message clearly and take appropriate action. If the pain is simply part of a healing process or an inevitable aspect of aging, acceptance allows us to carry it with grace and dignity rather than with bitterness and struggle. The Buddha's image of the salt in the cup versus the salt in the river is particularly helpful. When our sense of self is small and rigid, when we identify completely with the body and its sensations, when we have no space in consciousness, then pain overwhelms us entirely, like salt overwhelming a small cup of water. But through meditation and practice, we discover that awareness itself is vast, much larger than any particular content of experience. We are not just the body feeling pain, but the awareness that knows the body, feels the pain, and also knows much more. We are the sky, not just the clouds passing through. When pain arises in this vast sky of awareness, it is still noticed, but it does not define the whole of experience. There is space to breathe, space to be, space to respond, rather than merely react. This does not happen overnight or through mere intellectual understanding. It requires patient, repeated practice of being with difficulty without adding extra layers of mental suffering. It requires countless repetitions of noticing the second arrow and choosing not to shoot it. It requires cultivating equanimity through meditation, developing the capacity to observe changing experience without constantly trying to manipulate it into being what we prefer. Over time, through dedicated practice, the mind naturally becomes less reactive, more spacious, more capable of being present with whatever arises. This is genuine spiritual maturity, not the absence of difficulty, but a transformed relationship to difficulty that allows for peace even in challenging circumstances. As we continue through these teachings, we can practice with the two arrows in our own lives. When physical pain arises, can we feel it as bare sensation without immediately adding stories about how terrible it is? When emotional pain arises, disappointment or sadness or anxiety, can we create space around it rather than collapsing into identification with it? Can we notice when we are about to shoot the second arrow and pause, breathe, and choose a different response? This is practical Dharma that directly addresses the suffering of our daily lives. The Buddha offers us not just philosophy, but tools for transformation, practices that lead to genuine freedom from unnecessary suffering. Let us carry this understanding forward as we explore the next story about not clinging even to the teachings themselves. Capítulo 12. A Jangada, a Historia, the raft. One day, the Buddha was teaching a group of monks about the purpose and proper use of the Dharma, his teachings. He wanted them to understand something essential about the path so they would not become confused or attached to the very teachings meant to liberate them. He began, as he often did, with a parable, a story that would make the teaching clear and memorable. He asked them to imagine a scenario, to place themselves in a particular situation so they could discover the truth through their own understanding rather than merely accepting his words on faith. Listen carefully, he said, and consider what you would do in this circumstance. Imagine, the Buddha said, a man traveling through a wilderness on a long journey to reach a distant destination. He walks for days through forests and across plains, following rough paths, heading toward a place where he knows safety and peace await him. But eventually, he comes to a wide, swift river that blocks his path completely. On this side of the river, the bank where he stands, there is danger. Wild animals roam, bandits hide in the forest, the land is treacherous and hostile. But on the far shore, which he can see clearly across the water, lies safe ground, peaceful territory where he can complete his journey without fear. He must cross this river. There is no other way forward, no bridge in sight, no boat waiting at the shore, no other travelers to help him across. The man considers his situation carefully. The river is too deep and swift to simply wade across. If he tries to swim with the current, he will be swept downstream and likely drown. He needs some way to cross safely, so he gathers materials from the forest around him, fallen branches, vines, bamboo, whatever he can find. With effort and skill, he constructs a simple raft, binding the materials together, testing its buoyancy in the shallow water near shore. It is not beautiful or elaborate, but it is sturdy enough to serve its purpose. When the raft is ready, he pushes it into the water, climbs aboard, and uses a long pole to propel himself across the river, fighting the current, making steady progress toward the far shore despite difficulty and effort. After much work, paddling and steering carefully, he finally reaches the opposite bank. He climbs off the raft onto solid ground, feeling the safety and relief of having crossed successfully. He stands on the far shore and the dangerous territory is now behind him, across the river. He is safe. The raft lies at the water's edge where he left it, having served its purpose perfectly. Now the Buddha asked his monks a question. What do you think this man should do with the raft now that he has crossed the river? Should he think to himself, "This raft has been very helpful to me. It carried me safely across dangerous water. Therefore, I should honor it and carry it on my back as I continue my journey. Perhaps he should hoist it onto his shoulders and walk carrying this heavy burden out of gratitude and attachment. The monks smiled, understanding immediately that this would be absurd. "No, venerable teacher," they replied. "That would be foolish. The raft served its purpose in crossing the river, but now it is no longer needed. It would be a burden rather than a help if he carries it further. The wise thing would be to leave the raft at the shore, or perhaps push it back into the water for another traveler who needs to cross. He should continue his journey unencumbered, taking with him only what serves his continued progress." The Buddha nodded, pleased with their understanding. "Exactly right," he said. "You see clearly the foolishness of carrying an unnecessary burden out of attachment, even attachment to something that was genuinely useful in its proper time and context." Then the Buddha made the connection explicit, applying the parable to spiritual practice. "In exactly the same way, monks, my teachings are like a raft, skillful means for crossing over from the shore of suffering to the shore of liberation, from confusion to clarity, from bondage to freedom. The Dharma is a vehicle, a method, a tool, not an end in itself. I have given you teachings about impermanence, teachings about suffering and its causes, teachings about ethical conduct, meditation practices, ways of understanding experience. All of these are supremely useful for crossing the river of samsara. Use them, practice them. Let them carry you across the dangerous waters of craving, aversion, and delusion. They will serve you well if you apply them sincerely and with understanding." But, the Buddha continued with great emphasis, when you have crossed over, when you have reached awakening, when you have understood directly the truths I have been pointing to, do not cling to the teachings themselves. Do not carry them as a burden or an identity. Do not become so attached to the raft that you forget the purpose was always to reach the far shore, not to possess a wonderful raft. The Dharma is for using, for crossing over, not for clinging to. Even my teachings, even these methods that lead to freedom, must ultimately be released. If you should let go of attachment to wrong views and unskillful states, how much more should you let go of attachment to right views and skillful teachings once they have served their purpose? The Buddha looked at his monks with great love and continued. Some people encounter the Dharma and they become collectors of teachings, accumulating knowledge, memorizing sutras, debating fine points of doctrine. They carry the raft on their backs, so to speak, burdened by their learning, using teachings as weapons in arguments, or as ornaments to display their spiritual sophistication. They miss the point entirely. The teachings are not meant to be collected, but applied, not meant to be believed, but tested in direct experience, not meant to create a new identity as a Buddhist, but to dissolve all rigid identities in the freedom of direct knowing. Do not become raft carriers when you could be free travelers who have crossed to the far shore. Others encounter the Dharma and they become attached to particular forms of practice or particular teachers. They think, I am a meditator who does this specific technique, or I belong to this lineage, and that makes me special. They identify with their practice rather than letting their practice liberate them from identification. They cannot imagine practicing differently, even if their current practice is no longer serving them, because they are attached to the raft, attached to the familiar form, attached to being the kind of person who uses this particular method. But the wise practitioner uses whatever method works for crossing in this moment, willing to pick up and put down different approaches as needed, never confusing the means with the goal. The Buddha wanted his monks to understand something profound about the nature of all concepts and all practices. Even true ideas about reality are still ideas, maps rather than territory, fingers pointing at the moon rather than the moon itself. The map can guide us to the destination, but when we arrive, we experience the place directly and no longer need the map. The finger can direct our gaze to the moon, but when we see the moon, we look at the moon itself, not at the finger. In the same way, teachings about impermanence can guide us to see impermanence directly, but the direct seeing is what liberates, not the concept. Teachings about non-self can help us investigate and discover the truth of non-self, but the discovery itself is what frees us, not the belief or idea. This teaching challenged his monks to hold the Dharma lightly, to use it without grasping it, to let it transform them without becoming another source of identification and attachment. It is a teaching about non-attachment that extends even to non-attachment to Buddhism itself. The goal is not to become a good Buddhist, but to wake up, to see clearly, to live freely, to end suffering. If Buddhist teachings and practices help accomplish this, wonderful, use them gratefully, but never mistake the vehicle for the destination, the raft for the far shore, the map for the territory. The point is always liberation, freedom, direct seeing, not accumulation of spiritual knowledge or identification with a spiritual path or tradition. One of the monks, deeply moved by this teaching, asked a final question. Venerable teacher, if we are to eventually let go of even the Dharma, how will we know when it is time to put down the raft? How will we know when we have reached the far shore? The Buddha smiled with infinite gentleness. You will know, he replied, when you are free. When craving has ended, when aversion has dissolved, when delusion has been replaced by clear seeing, when there is peace that does not depend on conditions, when you meet life's changes with equanimity and compassion, when you no longer suffer from the tyranny of self-concern, you will know you have crossed. Until then, use the raft, practice sincerely, but hold everything lightly, even the path itself. Capítulo 13. A jangada, o ensinamento, understanding the raft. The parable of the raft is one of the most liberating and paradoxical teachings in all of Buddhism. It reveals that the Dharma itself, the very path to freedom, must ultimately be released and not clung to if we are to be truly free. This teaching prevents spiritual practice from becoming just another form of attachment, another way the ego fortifies itself, another identity we grasp at for security and meaning. It points to something radical, that freedom means freedom from everything, including freedom from our ideas about freedom, from our spiritual practices, from our identification as spiritual practitioners. This does not mean we abandon practice prematurely or become nihilistic. It means we understand the purpose of practice clearly and we use it skillfully without turning it into a new prison of concepts and identities. The teaching addresses a common problem that arises on spiritual paths across all traditions. People begin practice because they are suffering and they genuinely want to find freedom and peace. The teachings and practices begin to help them, providing genuine relief, insight, and transformation. But then something subtle happens. They become attached to the path itself, identified with being a Buddhist, or a meditator, or a Dharma student. Their spiritual practice, which was meant to dissolve the rigid sense of separate self, becomes instead a new improved self, a spiritual self that is more enlightened than others, more serious, more committed. The raft that was meant to carry them across becomes instead a badge of identity, a source of pride, a new form of clinging disguised as spiritual advancement. This is not to criticize genuine dedication or the natural sense of belonging that comes from practicing within a community and tradition. There is nothing wrong with calling yourself a Buddhist or feeling part of the Sangha, the community of practitioners. The problem arises when this identity becomes rigid, when it becomes something we use to feel superior or separate, when it becomes another way of grasping for solid ground in an impermanent world. The Buddha is encouraging a light touch, a willingness to use forms and teachings and identities provisionally while recognizing their ultimately constructed and empty nature. We can practice within forms while not being imprisoned by them. We can honor teachings while not reifying them into absolute unchanging truth. The concept of anatta, non-self, is central to understanding the Raft teaching. The Buddha taught that there is no fixed, unchanging, independent self or soul. What we call self is actually a constantly changing process, a flow of physical sensations, feelings, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness that arise dependent on conditions. When we see through the illusion of a solid separate self, when we recognize ourselves as process rather than thing, a profound freedom becomes possible. We stop defending and promoting a self that does not actually exist in the way we imagined. We stop taking everything personally because we see that the person is not what we thought. We rest in the flow of experience itself rather than contracting around an imaginary center point. But even this teaching about non-self can become something we cling to, another concept we identify with. I understand non-self. We might think proudly, I am a person who has realized anatta. But this understanding of non-self has now become part of a new self-concept. A more sophisticated version perhaps, but still a form of identification and clinging. The teaching about non-self was meant to liberate us from self-clinging entirely, not to give us a better concept to cling to. This is why the Buddha emphasizes that even correct views must ultimately be released. The Raft of Dharma includes teachings about non-self, and these teachings are supremely useful for crossing over, but eventually we must release even the concept of non-self and simply be the flowing process without any conceptual overlay at all. Alan Watts, the British philosopher who did much to introduce Zen Buddhism and Eastern thought to Western audiences, often spoke about this paradox. He pointed out that many Westerners come to Buddhism seeking a solution to their problems, seeking a method to improve themselves, and they find meditation and philosophy that promise transformation. But, Watts emphasized, the whole point is to discover that the self you are trying to improve does not exist as a solid, independent entity. You cannot improve an illusion. The search for a better self is like trying to make your reflection in the mirror taller by standing on a box. You have mistaken what is actually happening. The practice is not about self-improvement, but about seeing through the self altogether. And this seeing naturally brings freedom, compassion, and peace without any effort to improve. Watts also loved to emphasize what he called the wisdom of insecurity, recognizing that our constant grasping for certainty, permanence, and solid ground is itself the source of anxiety and suffering. The Raft teaching embodies this wisdom. When we can let go of needing to hold on to anything permanently, including our spiritual practices and insights, we discover an ease and flexibility that is itself a taste of freedom. We become like water, able to flow and adapt to whatever circumstances arise, not needing things to be any particular way, meeting each moment fresh without the burden of fixed positions and rigid identities. This does not mean we have no values or no commitments, but that we hold them lightly, willing to revise and release when appropriate. The teaching also addresses the relationship between relative truth and ultimate truth, what Buddhist philosophy calls the two truths doctrine. At the relative or conventional level, Buddhist teachings are true and helpful. Impermanence is real, suffering has causes, ethical conduct matters, meditation transforms consciousness. These truths operate at the level of our everyday lived experience, and they provide genuine guidance for reducing suffering and increasing wisdom and compassion. We should absolutely use these teachings, practice sincerely, and trust the path. This is crossing the river, using the raft skillfully. At the ultimate level, however, all concepts are empty of inherent existence, including Buddhist concepts. There is no separate thing called impermanence apart from changing phenomena. There is no suffering entity apart from the experiencing of unsatisfactoriness. All dharmas, all phenomena and concepts are like reflections, appearing but lacking solid independent existence. The mature practitioner learns to hold both truths simultaneously, practicing at the relative level with sincerity and dedication, while understanding at the ultimate level that all forms are empty and all concepts are provisional. This is the middle way between nihilism, thinking nothing matters, so why bother practicing, and eternalism, thinking things have fixed inherent existence we must hold on to. The raft is real and useful at the relative level. Absolutely use it to cross the river. And the raft is empty at the ultimate level, having no fixed essence, arising dependent on conditions, ultimately to be released. Both are true from different perspectives, and both inform our practice in complementary ways. The Buddha's explicit statement that even right views should ultimately be released is particularly striking. He is not promoting relativism or saying that all views are equally valid. Wrong views, views rooted in ignorance and leading to suffering, should definitely be abandoned in favor of right views, views aligned with reality and leading to freedom. But even right views are still views, still conceptual frameworks, still fingers pointing, rather than the moon itself. When we have realized directly what the views were pointing toward, when we have crossed the river and stand on the shore of direct knowing, we can release the views themselves. They served their purpose perfectly, and now they would only be extra weight if we insist on carrying them further as possessions or achievements. This has practical implications for how we relate to teachings, teachers, and spiritual communities. We can receive teachings gratefully, test them in our own experience, and apply what works while remaining inwardly free and not dogmatic. We can respect teachers without making them into infallible authorities or perfect beings who can never be questioned. We can participate in spiritual communities and traditions while recognizing their human constructed nature and remaining open to wisdom from other sources as well. We use forms and structures without being used by them. We honor the raft without worshipping it or refusing to ever set it down. This mature relationship to practice prevents spiritual bypassing, using spirituality to avoid life's difficulties, and prevents spiritual materialism, collecting teachings and practices as ego ornaments. As we continue our journey through these stories, the raft teaching invites us to examine our own relationship to practice and path. Are we using Buddhist teachings to cross the river of suffering toward genuine freedom? Or have we become collectors of teachings, hoarders of practices, identifiers with a spiritual identity that is just ego in new clothes? Can we practice sincerely while holding everything lightly? Can we commit fully while remaining inwardly free? This is the delicate balance the Buddha points toward. Dedication without attachment, commitment without rigidity, practice without grasping. the far shore awaits, not as a future achievement, but as the freedom available right now when we release all the burdens we have been unnecessarily carrying, including the burden of our spiritual accomplishments and knowledge. Let us explore the next story about humility and the beginner's mind that can receive truth fresh and new. Capítulo 14. A xícara transbordante. A historia. The overflowing cup. In old Japan, there lived a university professor, a respected scholar who had spent his entire adult life studying philosophy, religion, and the great questions of human existence. He had read hundreds of books, earned advanced degrees, published papers, and taught generations of students. He was particularly proud of his knowledge of Buddhism, having read all the major sutras in translation, studied the history of Buddhist schools and their doctrines, and developed what he considered sophisticated understanding of Buddhist philosophy. Yet despite all this learning, he felt somehow unsatisfied, as if all his knowledge remained abstract and intellectual, not touching the core of his being or bringing the peace he had read about in texts describing enlightenment and liberation. He heard about a Zen master living in a remote monastery in the mountains, a teacher renowned for his direct realization and his ability to guide students to genuine awakening. The professor decided to visit this master, thinking perhaps the master could confirm his understanding or provide the missing piece that would complete his knowledge and finally bring him the peace he sought. He made the journey to the monastery, climbing mountain paths, arriving finally at the simple wooden buildings where monks practiced in silence and simplicity. He was shown to the master's quarters, a small room with bare walls, a low table, and cushions on the floor. The master sat calmly, an elderly man with clear eyes that seemed to see everything without judgment. The professor bowed politely and sat down across from the master, immediately beginning to speak before the master had even offered a greeting. He launched into a long explanation of his background, his studies, his understanding of various Buddhist schools and their differences. He explained his interpretation of key concepts like emptiness, Buddha nature, and enlightenment. He described the various teachers he had read and which ones he agreed with and which he found problematic in their formulations. He quoted sutras from memory and offered his analysis of their meaning. He spoke continuously for many minutes, demonstrating his extensive knowledge, perhaps unconsciously trying to impress the master or establish himself as an equal rather than a mere beginner. The Zen master listened patiently without interrupting, his face serene and unreadable. After a while, he quietly stood and left the room briefly, returning with a tray carrying a teapot and 2 cups. He set the tray on the low table between them and gestured for the professor to continue speaking while he prepared tea. The professor, pleased to have an audience and perhaps interpreting the tea as a sign of respect, continued his discourse on Buddhist philosophy with even more enthusiasm. He discussed meditation techniques he had read about, debated points of doctrine, shared his opinions on which practices were most effective and which were likely outdated cultural additions rather than essential teachings. The master picked up the teapot and began to pour tea into the professor's cup. The fragrant green tea flowed in a steady stream. The cup filled quickly, but the master did not stop pouring. The tea reached the brim of the cup and then began to overflow, spilling over the sides onto the saucer beneath. Still, the master continued pouring with the same calm, steady hand. The tea overflowed the saucer and began to pool on the wooden table, spreading toward the professor's side. The professor had been so absorbed in his talking that it took him a moment to notice what was happening. When he finally saw the tea spilling everywhere, he stopped mid-sentence and cried out in alarm. "Stop! The cup is full. Can you not see it is overflowing? No more will go in. The professor reached forward to move his things away from the spreading puddle of tea, confused and somewhat annoyed by what seemed like carelessness, or perhaps a deliberate insult from the master. Was the master not paying attention? Was this some kind of test or joke? The master finally stopped pouring and set down the teapot gently. He looked directly at the professor with eyes full of compassion and spoke for the first time since the professor had arrived. Like this cup, he said quietly, you are full of your own opinions, ideas, and speculations. How can I show you Zen unless you first empty your cup? The professor sat stunned, the words hitting him like a physical blow. In that moment, he saw himself clearly, saw how he had come to the master already full, so full of concepts and knowledge and opinions that there was no space for anything new to enter. He had not come as a student ready to learn, but as a scholar, looking for confirmation or debate. He had not come with the openness of genuine inquiry, but with the fullness of someone who already believes he knows. His cup was overflowing with ideas about Buddhism, leaving no room for the actual taste of Zen, the direct experience beyond all concepts and words. He had been so busy talking, so busy demonstrating what he knew, that he had not listened, had not created any space for receiving. Shame and humility washed over the professor in waves. He realized that all his years of study, while valuable in their own way, had created a kind of obstacle, a barrier of knowledge that prevented direct seeing. He had mistaken the map for the territory, the finger pointing at the moon for the moon itself, the menu for the meal. He had collected concepts about enlightenment without actually touching enlightenment. He had analyzed teachings about emptiness without directly experiencing the empty nature of his own conceptual mind. His very expertise had become his blindness. The more he knew, the less able he was to see freshly, to experience directly, to be present without the filter of accumulated knowledge. The professor bowed deeply, touching his forehead to the floor in genuine respect and contrition. "Please," he said, his voice shaking with emotion, "teach me how to empty my cup. I have been a fool, carrying around buckets of tea while dying of thirst for the living water. I do not want more concepts or philosophy. I want what you have, the direct realization, the actual freedom. I am willing to put aside everything I think I know if you will guide me." The Zen master smiled warmly, recognizing the sincerity of this request, the genuine turning that had happened in the professor's heart. "This," he said gently, "is the beginning. You have just taken your first real step on the path by recognizing that you do not know. Now you can learn. Now there is space for truth to enter." The master instructed the professor to stay at the monastery for a period of training, not as an honored scholar, but as a beginning student, doing the same work as everyone else, sitting in meditation without books to read, practicing in silence without opportunities to display his knowledge. The professor agreed immediately, understanding that this was exactly what he needed, to be stripped of his expertise and return to beginner's mind, fresh and open and empty. Over time, through this practice of emptying, he began to taste directly what all his studies had only pointed toward. He discovered that knowing about something and knowing something directly are entirely different. One is possessing information, the other is being transformed by truth. Capítulo 15. A xícara transbordante. O ensinamento. Understanding the overflowing cup. The story of the overflowing cup is a beloved teaching in Zen Buddhism, used to point toward the essential quality of Shoshin beginner's mind. Shoshin is the mind that approaches each moment and each experience with freshness, openness, curiosity, and lack of preconceptions. It is the mind of a child who sees snow for the first time and is filled with wonder, not having categories or expectations about what snow should be. It is the mind that can receive teaching because it does not already believe it knows everything. It is the mind that can discover truth because it has not filled itself with opinions about what truth must look like. Beginner's mind is paradoxically the most advanced state of consciousness because it is empty, spacious, and free from the accumulation of past experience that normally clouds perception. The opposite of beginner's mind is expert's mind, the consciousness that has seen and done and learned so much that it approaches everything through the filter of accumulated knowledge. Expert's mind knows what to expect. It knows how things work based on past experience. It has categories and judgments and preferences all ready to deploy. Expert's mind is efficient in many ways, allowing us to function without having to figure out every situation from scratch. But expert's mind is also closed, unable to see what does not fit its expectations, unable to learn what contradicts its knowledge, unable to be surprised or transformed. Expert's mind says, "I already know about this," and therefore misses what is actually present. It sees the past projected onto the present, rather than seeing the present freshly. The professor in the story represents all of us when we approach something with our cups already full. We come to meditation having read about meditation, so we know what should happen, and we miss what actually happens. We come to relationships with ideas about how relationships work based on past relationships, and we miss the unique person actually before us. We come to this present moment carrying all our accumulated opinions, judgments, knowledge, and trauma from the past, and we miss the freshness and possibility of now. Our fullness is our poverty. Our knowledge is our ignorance. What we think we know prevents us from truly seeing. This is the human condition, constantly projecting the past onto the present, rarely encountering reality directly without the distorting filters of memory and expectation. Spiritual practice, meditation in particular, is largely about learning to empty the cup repeatedly, learning to come to each moment fresh, despite the habitual tendency to interpret everything through the lens of past conditioning. When we sit in meditation and a thought arises, we practice noticing it and letting it go, rather than following it, believing it, or building on it. We return to the bare experience of breathing, of sitting, of being aware. This is emptying the cup. When we notice we are judging our experience as good or bad meditation, we let go of the judgment and return to direct experience. This is emptying the cup. When we notice we are comparing this meditation to yesterday's or planning tomorrow's, we release the comparing and planning and return to now. This is emptying the cup. We empty the cup 10,000 times, and each emptying is a moment of beginner's mind, fresh and open. Shunryu Suzuki Roshi, whose words we have encountered before, founded the San Francisco Zen Center and taught Zen to Americans for many years until his death in 1971. His book, Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, has become a classic of Buddhist literature. In it he writes, "In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities. In the expert's mind, there are few." This simple statement captures the entire teaching of the overflowing cup. When we approach life with beginner's mind, we are open to the full range of what might happen or be revealed. We do not know what this breath will feel like, what this moment will bring, what this person will say. everything is possible. This openness is both humbling and exhilarating. We are not in control through our knowledge, but we are alive to mystery and surprise and discovery. Suzuki Roshi also emphasized that beginner's mind is not something we achieve once and then possess permanently. It is not an accomplishment or a state we attain through practice and then get to keep. Rather, it is something we return to again and again, moment by moment. Our cups are constantly filling with new thoughts, judgments, and knowledge. The practice is constantly emptying them. We will never be done emptying the cup because the cup is always filling. This is not a problem, but simply the nature of having a human mind that thinks, categorizes, and remembers. The practice is the willingness to keep emptying, to keep returning to not knowing, to keep approaching each moment fresh, despite the mind's tendency to rely on what it thinks it already knows. The teaching has profound implications for how we approach learning and growth. In our educational systems and professional environments, expertise is valued above all. We are rewarded for knowing, for having answers, for demonstrating competence and certainty. Saying "I do not know" is often interpreted as weakness or ignorance rather than wisdom and openness. We are trained from childhood to fill our cups and never empty them, to accumulate knowledge and skills and credentials, to become experts who have it figured out. This has value in certain domains, but it creates a profound problem for spiritual growth and genuine wisdom. We cannot learn what we think we already know. We cannot receive what we have no space for. We cannot be transformed by truth we have already categorized and filed away as understood. True learning, transformative learning, requires vulnerability and humility. It requires admitting that we do not know, that we might be wrong, that our current understanding is incomplete or mistaken. This is difficult for the ego, which wants to appear competent, knowledgeable, and certain. The ego fears being exposed as ignorant or foolish, so it pretends to know even when it does not. It holds on to opinions even when evidence contradicts them. It defends positions even when they no longer serve. The ego's cup is always full and always defensive. Genuine inquiry requires setting aside this ego defense and risking the vulnerability of not knowing, of being a beginner, of possibly being wrong and having to revise our understanding. This risk is what makes real learning possible. The Zen master's response to the professor demonstrates skillful teaching. He did not argue with the professor or criticize his knowledge directly. He did not engage in philosophical debate or point out flaws in the professor's understanding. Instead, he created a vivid, wordless demonstration that allowed the professor to see his own condition clearly. The overflowing cup was a mirror, held up so the professor could recognize what was happening in his own mind. This kind of teaching bypasses the intellectual defenses and speaks directly to intuitive understanding. In a single moment, through a simple act of pouring too much tea, the master conveyed what could not be conveyed through lengthy explanation. This is the art of Zen teaching, using direct methods to create sudden recognition that cuts through conceptual confusion. The story also reveals something about the relationship between intellectual knowledge and direct realization. The professor's knowledge of Buddhism was not useless or wrong. It simply was not the same as awakening. Knowing about enlightenment is not being enlightened. Reading about meditation is not the same as meditating. Understanding the concept of emptiness is not the same as directly experiencing the empty nature of phenomena and self. There is a place for study and intellectual understanding, especially in the beginning of practice, when we need conceptual maps to guide us. But intellectual understanding must eventually be balanced with and deepened by direct experience, or it remains abstract and does not transform our lives. We must taste the tea ourselves, not just read descriptions of what tea tastes like. The professor's willingness to stay at the monastery and practice as a beginner, despite his status and knowledge, demonstrates genuine spiritual maturity. He could have defended his ego, argued with the master, dismissed the teaching as anti-intellectual or simplistic. But instead, he recognized truth when he encountered it, even though it was humbling. He was willing to empty his cup, to set aside his expertise and start fresh. This willingness is itself a form of beginner's mind, the flexibility and openness that allows transformation. When we encounter teaching that challenges our current understanding, do we defend and resist? Or do we pause, consider deeply, and remain open to the possibility that we might need to revise our views? The quality of our response reveals whether our cup is full or whether there is space for new understanding. As we move forward through these stories, we can practice beginner's mind in our own lives. When we meditate, can we approach it fresh rather than with expectations based on past meditations? When we meet someone we think we know well, can we see them fresh rather than through the accumulated history of past interactions? When we encounter teaching, can we receive it openly rather than immediately filtering it through what we think we already know? Can we say, "I do not know," and mean it, resting in the humility and openness of genuine not knowing? This is the practice of emptying the high cup moment by moment, creating space for wisdom to enter, for reality to reveal itself, for truth to transform us. Let us carry this teaching of openness and humility as we explore the next story about the power of boundless loving kindness to transform fear into peace. Capítulo 16. Meta na Floresta Assombrada. A história. Meta in the Haunted Forest. In the time of the Buddha, a group of monks came to him, requesting guidance for their rainy season retreat, the annual 3-month period when monks would settle in one place to practice intensively, rather than wandering from village to village. The Buddha assigned them to a beautiful forest grove far from human habitation, a place of great natural beauty and silence, perfect for deep meditation practice. The monks bowed gratefully and traveled to the designated forest, arriving as the first rains began. They established a simple camp beneath the great trees, arranged their sitting places, and prepared to devote themselves fully to practice without distraction. The forest seemed like paradise, filled with birdsong, dappled with sunlight filtering through leaves, cooled by gentle breezes. They felt fortunate to have such an ideal place for their retreat. The monks did not know that this forest was home to tree spirits, beings from the realm of spirits and ghosts who had dwelt there for countless years, invisible to human eyes, going about their own mysterious existence. These spirits were not accustomed to having humans in their territory, and they certainly were not pleased to have monks settling in for an extended stay, sitting in meditation beneath the very trees where the spirits made their homes. The spirits felt their peaceful existence was being invaded, their territory occupied without permission. They grew angry and decided to drive these unwelcome visitors away through fear and harassment, making the forest so unpleasant and frightening that the monks would have no choice but to leave and find somewhere else to practice. That very first night, strange things began to happen. Horrible wailing and moaning sounds echoed through the darkness between the trees, sounds unlike any natural creature. Terrifying apparitions appeared at the edges of firelight, ghostly shapes that moved in unnatural ways, faces twisted in rage and malice. Invisible hands seemed to push and prod the monks as they tried to sleep. Cold spots of air appeared suddenly, chilling them to the bone despite the warm night. Objects moved on their own, bowls tipped over, robes were pulled and tugged. The smell of decay and rotting flesh wafted through camp without any visible source. All night the monks huddled together, unable to sleep, hearts pounding with primal fear. They had never experienced anything like this before. As soon as dawn broke and the disturbances ceased, the monks held council. They were badly shaken, exhausted from lack of sleep, deeply frightened by what they had experienced. Several monks argued they should leave immediately and find a different location for their retreat. How can we practice meditation when we are being terrorized every night? What is the point of staying in a place where we cannot even sleep peacefully? Others felt torn, not wanting to give up on the retreat or disobey the Buddha's assignment, but also unable to imagine 3 months of such nightly torment. After much discussion, they decided together to return to the Buddha, explain what had happened, and request a different forest for their practice. Surely the teacher would understand and reassign them once he heard about the hostile spirits. They walked back to where the Buddha was staying, traveling in a tight group for mutual comfort and protection. When they arrived, they found the Buddha teaching under his usual tree, surrounded by other disciples and lay people. The monks waited respectfully for a break in the teaching, then approached and bowed. They explained what had happened in the forest, describing the terrifying experiences of that first night, the apparitions and sounds and disturbances. They admitted their fear honestly, not trying to pretend they were braver than they felt. "Please, venerable teacher," they requested, "assign us to a different forest for our retreat. We cannot practice in that haunted place. We are too frightened." The Buddha listened to their account with great compassion and patience, never judging their fear or suggesting they were weak for returning. When they finished speaking, the Buddha was silent for a moment, considering what they had told him and what teaching would serve them best. Then he spoke with gentle authority. "I am going to send you back to the same forest for your retreat." The monks looked at each other in dismay and confusion. Back to that terrible place. How could this be wisdom or compassion? But before they could protest, the Buddha continued. "You went to the forest the first time without adequate protection. This time I will give you the only protection you need, the most powerful protection that exists. I will teach you a practice that will keep you safe from all harm, a meditation that will transform your situation completely. If you practice what I teach you sincerely and continuously, not only will the spirits not harm you, but they will become your protectors and supporters." The monks listened intently, desperate for whatever teaching could possibly make such a difference. The Buddha taught them the practice of metta, loving kindness meditation. He instructed them in how to generate and radiate boundless loving kindness toward all beings without exception, beginning with themselves, then extending to friends and loved ones, then to neutral people they neither liked nor disliked, then to difficult people and enemies, and finally to all beings in all directions, near and far, visible and invisible, human and non-human. He taught them specific phrases to recite internally, while feeling the genuine wish for the happiness and well-being of all beings. May all beings be safe and protected. May all beings be healthy and strong. May all beings be truly happy. May all beings live with ease. The Buddha explained that they should practice this metta meditation continuously, not just during formal sitting, but throughout the day and night. As they walked through the forest, radiate loving kindness to every tree, every creature, every spirit, whether seen or unseen. As they prepared food, radiate loving kindness. as they lay down to sleep, fill their hearts and minds with boundless well-wishing for all beings. Let your minds become so saturated with loving kindness that there is no space for fear or aversion. Let your hearts become so spacious and warm that even hostile spirits must feel it and be affected by it. Meet hatred with love. Meet fear with compassion. Meet hostility with goodwill. This is your protection, more powerful than any weapon or spell or fortress. The monks bowed and accepted this teaching, though some still felt doubtful. How could something as simple as kind thoughts possibly protect them from terrifying spirits who seemed to want to harm them? But they trusted the Buddha and committed themselves to practicing exactly as he instructed. They returned to the forest, and this time as they walked beneath the trees toward their camp, they practiced metta with each step. May all beings be safe. May all beings be happy. May all beings live with ease. They thought of the tree spirits they could not see and sincerely wished them well. May you be happy. May you live peacefully in your homes. May you be free from suffering. We mean you no harm. We come in peace and with respect for your dwelling place. Capítulo 16. Metta na Floresta Assombrada. O ensinamento. Understanding metta in the haunted forest. The story of the monks in the haunted forest is a profound teaching about the transformative power of metta, loving kindness, and its ability to change not just our inner state, but the very situations we find ourselves in. Metta is one of the 4 Brahmaviharas, the divine abodes or sublime attitudes that Buddhism encourages us to cultivate. The 4 are metta or loving kindness, karuna or compassion, mudita or sympathetic joy, and upekkha or equanimity. Together, they represent the highest qualities of an awakened heart, ways of relating to all beings and all experience that bring peace to ourselves and benefit to the world. Of these 4, metta is considered foundational, because when we wish all beings well, compassion naturally arises when we encounter suffering. Joy naturally arises when we encounter others' happiness, and equanimity provides the balance that prevents these qualities from becoming sentimental or overwhelming. The practice of metta meditation involves systematically directing goodwill and kind wishes toward different categories of beings, gradually expanding the circle of our care until it includes everyone and everything without exception. We begin with ourselves because we cannot genuinely wish others well if we are filled with self-hatred and harshness toward ourselves. Many people find this first step surprisingly difficult, revealing how little kindness they actually offer themselves. We then extend metta to benefactors and loved ones, people for whom goodwill flows easily and naturally. This builds momentum and strengthens the feeling of loving kindness. Next, we include neutral people, those we neither like nor dislike, recognizing that they too want to be happy and free from suffering just as we do. This begins to break down the artificial boundaries between us and them. The practice then moves to difficult people, those who have harmed us or whom we dislike or resent. This is where metta practice becomes truly transformative and challenging. We are asked to genuinely wish well-being even for those who have hurt us, not because we condone their harmful actions, but because we recognize that their suffering is what leads them to harm others, and because holding hatred in our hearts poisons us more than it affects them. This does not mean we allow ourselves to be harmed or that we do not maintain appropriate boundaries. It means we release the burden of hatred and wish for the transformation of all beings, including difficult ones. Finally, we extend metta to all beings in all directions, near and far, friend and stranger and enemy, human and animal and spirit, visible and invisible, without any limit or exception. May all beings be safe, healthy, happy, and live with ease. The monks in the story were afraid of the spirits, and this fear created a hostile dynamic. Fear generates tension and defensiveness. The spirits felt this fear and interpreted it as hostility or weakness, which reinforced their own aggression. It was a cycle of mutual negativity, each side's fear and hostility feeding the others. When the monks returned practicing metta, radiating genuine goodwill and kindness toward the spirits, the entire dynamic shifted. The spirits, though not human, were sentient beings capable of feeling and responding to the emotional atmosphere around them. When they felt themselves included in the monks' boundless well-wishing, when they felt that these humans meant them no harm and actually wished them happiness, their hostility dissolved. The fear that had been driving their aggressive behavior melted in the warmth of loving kindness. This transformation illustrates a profound truth about relationships and conflict. When we meet hostility with hostility, we escalate conflict. When we meet fear with fear, we reinforce the cycle. But when we meet negativity with genuine loving kindness, something shifts. This does not always work immediately or perfectly, especially with humans who have complex psychological patterns and long-standing grievances. But it works more often than we might expect. Many situations we interpret as requiring defensive aggression might actually be transformed through a radical shift to genuine care and goodwill. The spirits became not just neutral, but actively protective and supportive of the monks because they felt genuinely cared for, perhaps for the first time in their long existence. Love has power to transform enemies into friends when given sincerely and unconditionally. Sharon Salzberg, an American Buddhist teacher who has specialized in teaching metta practice for decades, emphasizes that loving kindness is not the same as liking everyone or pretending to feel warm, fuzzy feelings we do not actually feel. Metta is a practice, a training, a deliberate cultivation of goodwill. We may not initially feel loving kindness toward difficult people or even toward ourselves, but we can practice wishing them well, and over time, this practice changes our hearts. Salzberg often teaches that the phrases used in metta practice, may you be safe, may you be happy, may you be healthy, may you live with ease, are like seeds planted in the ground of consciousness. At first, nothing seems to happen, but with patient repetition and sincere intention, these seeds sprout and grow, gradually transforming our habitual patterns of judgment and aversion into spacious goodwill. The practice of metta is particularly powerful for working with fear, as the monk's story demonstrates. Fear tends to contract our awareness, narrow our perspective, and activate defensive or aggressive responses. When we are afraid, we see threats everywhere, and we become hostile toward what threatens us. But metta practice reverses this contraction. When we practice wishing all beings well, including whatever we fear, our hearts and minds expand rather than contract. We remember our common ground. All beings want happiness. All beings want to avoid suffering. All beings are vulnerable. This recognition creates connection rather than separation, and connection dissolves fear. We can still be appropriately cautious. We can still protect ourselves from genuine danger, but we are not dominated by paranoid fear that sees enemies everywhere and trusts nothing. Metta practice also protects us from the internal poisons of hatred and ill will, which the Buddha called one of the 3 root poisons along with greed and delusion. When we harbor hatred, even justified hatred toward those who have genuinely harmed us or others, we carry that poison in our own hearts and minds. Hatred creates tension, stress, and suffering in the one who hates, often more than in the target of hatred. Hatred disturbs our peace, disrupts our meditation, colors all our experiences, and can lead us to harmful actions we later regret. When we practice metta, we actively counter hatred with its opposite quality. We cannot simultaneously hold both genuine loving kindness and genuine hatred in our hearts. They are mutually exclusive. When metta arises, hatred dissolves. When metta is practiced regularly, hatred finds less and less ground to take root. The teaching reveals that true spiritual practice is not about avoiding difficulty or finding a safe, comfortable place where nothing challenges us. The Buddha sent the monks back to the same forest, not to a different, easier location. He did not remove the external challenge, but gave them an internal resource that transformed their relationship to the challenge. This is how spiritual practice works. We do not escape from the difficulties of life, but we develop inner qualities that allow us to meet difficulties with wisdom, courage, and compassion, rather than with fear and reactivity. The outer circumstances may be exactly the same, hostile spirits in a dark forest, but our inner experience is completely transformed. What was unbearable becomes workable. What was terrifying becomes an opportunity for practice. This story also teaches about the interdependence of all beings and the power of our mental states to affect our environment. We sometimes imagine that our thoughts and feelings are private, locked inside our skulls, affecting no one but ourselves. But this is not entirely true. Our inner states manifest in our bodies, our expressions, our energy, our actions, and these affect everyone around us. A person filled with anger emits a palpable hostility that others feel and react to. A person filled with loving kindness emits warmth and safety that others feel and are drawn to. The monks' metta practice created an atmosphere in the forest that the spirits could not help but feel and respond to. In our own lives, when we cultivate metta, we change not just ourselves but the entire relational field we participate in. The practice of metta is not a naive pretending that everyone is nice or that harmful actions do not matter. It is a sophisticated recognition that hatred does not solve the problem of hatred, that violence does not end violence, that we cannot create peace through perpetuating hostility and division. Metta allows us to acknowledge harm, maintain appropriate boundaries, and even take necessary action to prevent harm, all while maintaining a heart that wishes for the transformation and well-being of all involved, including those causing harm. This is the Bodhisattva path, responding skillfully to suffering and harm while never abandoning the fundamental aspiration for the liberation of all beings. It is difficult, it requires tremendous courage and patience, but it is the only path that actually leads to genuine peace rather than temporary truces between enemies still harboring mutual hatred. As we continue, we can ask ourselves how metta practice might transform our own haunted forests, the situations and relationships where we feel afraid, defensive, or hostile. What would it be like to meet our difficulties with radical goodwill? What would it be like to sincerely wish well-being even for those we struggle with? This does not mean we become passive or allow harm. It means we cease poisoning ourselves with hatred and we open the possibility for transformation. The spirits became protectors when they felt genuinely included in the circle of care. Who in our lives might respond similarly if they felt our sincere goodwill despite past difficulties? This is the invitation of metta practice. to expand our hearts until nothing and no one is excluded. Let us carry this teaching of boundless loving kindness as we explore the final story about the treasure that has always been within us. Capítulo 18, O Tesoro Enterrado, a Historia, the buried treasure. The Buddha once told a parable about a man who lived in poverty, working long hard days for little pay, barely surviving, always worried about where his next meal would come from. This poor man lived in a small dilapidated hut on a piece of land he had inherited from his parents, land that seemed worthless and barren. He spent his life struggling, believing himself to be unlucky and unfortunate, envying others who seemed to have been blessed with prosperity and ease while he had nothing. Every day was the same, exhausting labor for minimal reward. Never enough to get ahead or feel secure, just surviving day to day with no hope for anything better. He saw himself as fundamentally poor, as someone whom fate had cursed, as someone without resources or value. What this man did not know, what he had never discovered despite living on this land his entire life, was that directly beneath his small hut, buried under the floor where he slept every night, lay an enormous treasure. His ancestors generations before had hidden valuable jewels, gold coins, and precious objects in a secure chamber deep underground, planning to use this wealth when needed, but dying before they could retrieve it or tell their descendants about its location. The treasure had remained there undisturbed for decades, growing more valuable as time passed, waiting patiently to be discovered. The man literally slept on top of vast wealth every single night, completely unaware, believing himself to be destitute while he was actually incredibly rich. His poverty was not real in an ultimate sense. It was a failure of recognition, and not knowing what he actually possessed. Years passed this way, the man growing older, his body wearing out from hard labor, his spirit growing more bitter and resigned. He sometimes fantasized about what it would be like to be wealthy, to have enough, to feel secure and free from constant worry about survival. But these fantasies seemed impossible, like wishing for the moon. He did not understand that what he longed for was already his, already right there beneath him, simply hidden and unknown. His suffering was real even though its basis was a misperception. The treasure did not help him at all while it remained undiscovered. It might as well not have existed for all the good it did him. Potential wealth that is not recognized or accessed provides no relief from poverty. The truth that is not known does not liberate. One day, a wise wandering sage passed through the area and stopped at the poor man's hut to ask for water. The poor man, despite having so little, offered water graciously and invited the wanderer to rest in the shade. The sage, who had certain supernatural perceptions developed through years of meditation, looked at the man with compassion and then looked at the ground beneath the hut. He saw immediately what was hidden there, the treasure chamber filled with wealth. He understood the tragic irony of the situation, a man believing himself poor while sitting on immense riches. The sage decided he must help this man discover what was rightfully his, what had always been his but remained unknown and therefore useless. The sage spoke gently to the poor man. "Friend, you have shown me kindness when you have little to share, and so I wish to help you. Tell me, have you lived in this place your whole life?" The poor man nodded sadly. "Yes, I inherited this worthless plot from my parents, who inherited it from their parents. It has never provided anything but a place to sleep. The land is poor, nothing grows well here, and I have no resources to improve it. I am stuck here in my poverty." The sage smiled mysteriously. "What if I told you that you are not poor at all? What if I told you that you possess great wealth that you simply have not discovered? The poor man looked confused and skeptical, assuming this wanderer was mocking him or speaking in riddles. The sage continued. Directly beneath where your hut stands, underground, there is a chamber filled with treasure, jewels, and gold beyond measure. It has been there all along, through all your years of struggle. You are not a poor man who needs to acquire wealth. You are a rich man who simply needs to dig and uncover what is already yours. The poor man's eyes widened, torn between hope and disbelief. Is this true? Are you certain? How do you know this? The sage explained that he could perceive what was hidden and that he would never lie about such a matter. I cannot dig it up for you, he said. You must do that yourself. But I can tell you exactly where to dig, and I assure you it is there. The wealth has always been yours. You have always been rich. You simply did not know it until this moment. The poor man, with nothing to lose, began to dig in the spot the sage indicated. He dug through the floor of his hut, down into the earth, working with excitement and growing hope. After some time, his shovel struck something solid, stone. He cleared away the dirt and found a large stone slab. With great effort, he managed to pry it up, and there beneath it was a chamber just as the sage had described, filled with treasures that glittered in the light of his lamp. Gold coins, precious gems, valuable objects of all kinds. More wealth than he had ever imagined existed. He stared in stunned silence, then began to weep, overwhelmed by the realization that this had been here all along, through all his years of suffering and struggle, through all the nights he went to bed hungry and worried. He had never been poor. He had always been rich. He simply had not known. The Buddha paused in his story and looked at his disciples. You are all like this man, he said. You think you are poor, lacking, deficient, needing to acquire something you do not have in order to be complete and free. You think enlightenment is something distant that you must work hard to achieve someday in the future. You think peace and freedom are somewhere else, something you do not currently possess. But this is a misperception. You already possess Buddha nature, the enlightened nature that is your deepest truth. It has always been there, complete and perfect, never diminished by your confusion or struggles. You are not trying to become something new, but to recognize what you have always been, beneath the layers of ignorance and conditioning. The treasure represents your true nature, your Buddha nature, the awakened awareness that is your fundamental essence. It is not created by practice, it is revealed by practice. It is not earned, it is uncovered. All the teachings, all the meditation, all the ethical training, these are not building something new, but removing the obstacles that hide what is already present. You are digging away the dirt of ignorance, greed, and hatred to reveal the treasure that was never actually lost, only obscured. When you realize your true nature, you do not become something you were not before. You recognize what you have always been. This recognition changes everything while changing nothing. You were always Buddha, you simply did not know it. The poor man's years of suffering were real, even though they were based on not knowing his actual situation. Similarly, your suffering in samsara is real, even though it is based on not knowing your true nature. The practice is about waking up from the dream of separation and lack, recognizing the completeness and perfection that has always been present. The sage who revealed the treasure represents the teacher who points out your Buddha nature, but the teacher cannot give it to you because you already have it. The teacher can only help you recognize it, help you dig, help you see what was always there. The actual realization must be your own direct seeing, your own uncovering of the treasure beneath the surface of conceptual thinking and habitual identification. Capítulo 19. O tesouro enterrado, o ensinamento. Understanding the buried treasure. The parable of the buried treasure points to one of the most profound and liberating teachings in Buddhism, the concept of Buddha nature, or Tathagatagarbha. This teaching asserts that all beings already possess the fundamental nature of a Buddha, the enlightened quality of mind that is clear, luminous, wise, and compassionate. This Buddha nature is not something we need to create, acquire, earn, or deserve. It is our birthright, our true nature, what we are beneath all the accumulated conditioning and confusion. It is always present, never diminished by our mistakes or obscured conditions, simply waiting to be recognized and actualized. This is radically different from many religious worldviews that see humans as fundamentally flawed, sinful, or incomplete beings who must work to become worthy or acceptable. Buddhism sees the awakened state as our natural condition, and ignorance and suffering as temporary obscurations of this nature, clouds covering the sun. This teaching has enormous psychological and spiritual implications. When we understand that we already are fundamentally whole and complete, that enlightenment is not some impossible, distant achievement, but a recognition of what is always present, hope and confidence naturally arise. We are not trying to become something utterly different from what we are, but simply to see clearly what we have always been beneath the stories and identities we have constructed. This makes the path feel accessible rather than overwhelming. We are not scaling an infinite mountain, but removing the blindfold that prevented us from seeing we were already at the summit. The work is still real. Removing obscurations requires dedication and effort, but the destination is not far away. It is right here, closer than our own breath. The concept of Buddha nature is emphasized particularly in Mahayana Buddhism and most strongly in the Tathagatagarbha Sutras and in Zen Buddhism. In these traditions, practice is understood not as gradually becoming enlightened, but as gradually actualizing or manifesting the enlightenment that is already present. Dogen Zenji, the founder of Soto Zen in Japan, taught that practice and enlightenment are not separate, that Zazen, sitting meditation, is itself the expression of Buddha nature, not a technique to achieve something later. He coined the term Shusho Ito, practice realization are one. When we sit in meditation with proper posture, breath, and attitude, letting go of all gaining ideas, we are manifesting our Buddha nature. We are not practicing in order to become a Buddha someday. We are practicing as Buddha right now, expressing our true nature through the form of practice. This does not mean we are already perfectly enlightened in our behavior and understanding. Obviously, we still experience confusion, reactivity, and suffering. The treasure is buried, present, but not yet accessed. Buddha nature is like a seed that contains the full potential of the plant, but requires proper conditions, sunlight, water, soil, to germinate and grow. Or it is like gold ore that contains pure gold, but requires refining to remove the impurities and reveal the precious metal in its pure form. Our practice provides the conditions for Buddha nature to manifest more fully, removing the obscurations of greed, hatred, and delusion that prevent us from experiencing our true nature continuously. The nature itself is already perfect and complete, but our access to it and our ability to live from it must be developed through practice. The story raises an important question. If we already possess Buddha nature, why do we suffer? Why do we not simply recognize this immediately and live as Buddhas? The answer is ignorance, avidya, the fundamental not knowing that obscures our true nature. We have forgotten what we are. We have become identified with the body-mind complex, with our stories, with our ego structures, and we mistake these temporary conditioned phenomena for our true self. It is as if we have been living in a dream for so long, we have forgotten it is a dream, taking the dream world and dream identity as ultimately real. Awakening is waking from this dream, recognizing the dreamlike nature of all conditioned phenomena, and recognizing the awareness that has been present throughout, the Buddha nature that was never actually caught in the dream even while the dream was happening. The teaching of Buddha nature also informs how we relate to ourselves and others. If we truly understand that we and all beings possess Buddha nature, we cannot see ourselves or others as fundamentally bad, worthless, or irredeemable. We may behave in confused or harmful ways, yes, but this is not our true nature, just temporary obscuration like clouds covering the sun. When we look at others, even those whose behavior is harmful or destructive, we can see the Buddha nature present within them, obscured perhaps, but still there, still whole, still possessing the potential for awakening. This vision creates compassion and patience rather than judgment and condemnation. We want to help remove the obscurations for ourselves and others so that everyone's true nature can shine forth unimpeded. This is the Bodhisattva motivation, to work for the liberation of all beings, because we recognize that all beings fundamentally share the same enlightened nature. Dogen Zenji wrote extensively about Buddha nature, often emphasizing its all-pervasive quality. He taught that not only all sentient beings, but all phenomena possess Buddha nature. Mountains, rivers, grass, trees, all of reality is an expression of Buddha nature. This moves beyond a psychological teaching about human potential into a metaphysical vision of reality as fundamentally awake, fundamentally enlightened, fundamentally whole. When we realize Buddha nature, we do not just realize something about ourselves, we realize our fundamental unity with all existence. The boundary between self and world dissolves. We recognize that Buddha nature is not mine or yours, but the nature of reality itself. And we are expressions of that reality, waves on the ocean of awakening pretending to be separate droplets. The teacher in the story, the sage who reveals the treasure's location, represents the role of the spiritual teacher or guru in Buddhist practice. The teacher cannot give us Buddha nature because we already have it, and the teacher cannot realize it for us because realization must be our own direct experience. But the teacher can point out where to dig, can provide instructions and encouragement, can verify our experience, and can help us distinguish genuine realization from conceptual understanding or temporary meditative states. The relationship with a qualified teacher is considered extremely valuable in Buddhism precisely because, like the poor man, we might live our whole lives without discovering the treasure if no one tells us where to dig and convinces us it is worth the effort. The teacher has dug successfully and found the treasure in their own experience, so they can guide us with confidence and authority born of direct knowledge. However, the story makes clear that we must dig ourselves. No one can do the practice for us. No one can realize our Buddha nature on our behalf. We can read about enlightenment, hear teachings about it, believe it intellectually, but until we do the actual work of practice, digging through the layers of conditioning and ignorance, it remains merely a concept, like the treasure remaining buried and inaccessible. This is why Buddhism emphasizes direct practice, meditation, ethical conduct, cultivation of wisdom, rather than mere belief or intellectual understanding. The path is experiential. It must be walked and lived, not just studied and discussed. The treasure must be uncovered through our own hands, through our own persistent digging, even though what we uncover was always ours. The final aspect of the teaching is the transformation that comes from recognizing the treasure. The poor man's circumstances did not change immediately. He was still in the same hut, in the same body, but his entire understanding of his situation was revolutionized. He was no longer a poor man struggling to survive, but a wealthy man who could now access and use his resources. Similarly, when we recognize Buddha nature, our external circumstances may not immediately change. We may still face difficulties and challenges, but our relationship to everything transforms. We are no longer a small, separate, suffering self, trying desperately to survive in a hostile universe. We are an expression of awakened awareness, temporarily experiencing this particular human life, but fundamentally never separate from the whole, never truly threatened, never actually lacking anything essential. This recognition brings profound peace and freedom, even in the midst of ordinary life, with its inevitable ups and downs. As we move toward the conclusion of our journey through these stories, we carry with us the teaching of the buried treasure. You are not who you think you are. You are not fundamentally lacking or deficient. You are not separate from Buddha, from awakening, from peace and freedom. All of this is already your nature, already present, simply waiting to be recognized and uncovered. The entire spiritual path is the process of digging, of removing obscurations, of recognizing what has always been true. When you see this clearly, when you taste your true nature directly, even for a moment, everything shifts. The suffering continues to decrease, compassion naturally flows, wisdom illuminates experience, and peace becomes your ground rather than a distant goal. This is the promise and possibility available to all beings, because all beings share this same Buddha nature, this same fundamental completeness. Let us rest in this truth as we prepare to conclude and integrate these teachings. Capítulo 20. Conclusão. Repouso e integração. Conclusion. Here we are, having journeyed together through 9 ancient stories told by the Buddha, 9 portals into wisdom that has traveled across centuries to meet you exactly where you are in this moment. Each story carries medicine for the heart, pointing toward freedom from suffering through understanding, practice, and the recognition of your own true nature. The poisoned arrow taught us to address suffering directly, rather than getting lost in abstract questions. The bowl of oil showed us the power of unwavering attention and concentration. The burning house revealed the compassion of skillful means. The mustard seed helped us embrace the universality of loss and impermanence. The second arrow distinguished pain from suffering and showed us how to stop creating unnecessary anguish. The raft reminded us not to cling even to the teachings themselves. The overflowing cup invited us into beginner's mind, empty and ready to receive. The haunted forest demonstrated how loving kindness transforms fear into peace. And the buried treasure revealed that what we seek has always been within us, simply waiting to be recognized and uncovered. These teachings are not meant to remain as concepts in your mind, but to be lived, practiced, embodied in how you meet each day. The Buddha did not offer philosophy for intellectual entertainment, but practical tools for liberation from suffering. When you notice yourself asking endless questions that do not lead anywhere, remember the poisoned arrow and return to what actually helps. When you find your attention scattered and fragmented, remember the bowl of oil and gather yourself into focused presence. When you struggle to communicate truth to someone not ready to hear it, Remember the burning house and find skillful means that meet them where they are. When you face loss and grief, remember Kisa Gotami and the mustard seed, knowing that your pain connects you to all beings rather than isolating you. When suffering arises, remember the two arrows and ask yourself which arrow is actually present and which arrow you are adding through resistance and story. When you find yourself clinging to spiritual accomplishments or knowledge as if they define you, remember the raft and practice letting go even of what has served you well, traveling lightly and freely. When you approach experience with the fullness of already knowing, remember the overflowing cup and return to the freshness and openness of beginner's mind, empty and receptive. When you encounter hostility or feel afraid, remember the monks in the haunted forest and practice meeting difficulty with the radical power of loving kindness that transforms enemies into allies. And when you feel lacking, inadequate, or far from awakening, remember the poor man and his buried treasure, knowing that your Buddha nature is already complete and whole, simply waiting for the recognition that changes everything while changing nothing. These stories are companions for the journey, returning to offer guidance and perspective whenever you need them. Take a moment now to feel your body, this miracle of breath and sensation that has carried you through this long listening. Feel the weight of your body supported, held by the earth beneath you, needing to do nothing, achieve nothing, become nothing other than exactly what you already are. Notice your breath moving in and out without effort, the body breathing itself, life living through you. This breath that is happening right now, this moment of awareness, this is sufficient. This is enough. You are enough exactly as you are, right here, right now. All the wisdom we have explored tonight is pointing to this simple truth. You are already home. You have never actually left. You simply forgot for a while. And that forgetting is also part of the journey, part of the mystery of consciousness exploring itself through the adventure of apparent separation and the recognition of fundamental unity. As you prepare to rest, to surrender into sleep, know that you can release all effort now. The day is complete. The listening is complete. Whatever you accomplished or did not accomplish today, it is done. Whatever mistakes you made, whatever regrets you carry, you can set them down now like a heavy bag at the end of a long journey. Forgiveness flows naturally when we stop defending and simply allow ourselves to be human, imperfect, learning, growing. You have done your best with the understanding and resources you had available. That is always enough. The Buddha's compassion extends to you completely, without reservation, without conditions. You are held in the vast heart of loving kindness that includes all beings without exception, and that includes you exactly as you are, worthy of love simply because you exist, because you are an expression of the universe knowing itself, because Buddha nature flows through you as it flows through all things. Let your eyes close if they are not already closed, feeling the darkness behind your eyelids like a soft blanket. Let your jaw soften, your shoulders drop, your belly relax. Feel the natural rhythm of your breathing, requiring nothing from you, simply happening, the body knowing exactly what to do to keep you alive through the night. Trust this wisdom of the body. Trust the natural unfolding of rest and restoration that sleep brings. You do not need to make sleep happen or control it. Simply allow it, open to it, welcome it, like an old friend arriving to carry you into the healing darkness where the conscious mind releases its grip and deeper processes of integration and renewal take place. This too is practice. This letting go into not knowing. This surrender into the mystery of consciousness dissolving into sleep and dreams. If you have found peace in these stories, if something here has touched your heart or illuminated your path, return whenever you need this refuge. This space of wisdom and calm will be here waiting for you, a sanctuary you can visit whenever the world feels too loud or too much, whenever you need to remember what is true beneath the surface chaos of daily life. Consider subscribing so you can find your way back easily, keeping this harbor of peace accessible for the nights when you need gentle words and ancient wisdom to guide you back to your own center, back to the recognition of your own completeness. Share this gift with others who might need it, those who struggle with sleep, those who carry heavy hearts, those who are seeking but have not yet found the teachings that speak to their soul. We all need reminders. We all forget. We all benefit from returning again and again to these timeless truths that the Buddha offered with such compassion and skill. And now, dear friend, it is time to rest completely. The 9 stories have been told. The teachings have been offered. The seeds have been planted in the soil of your consciousness, and they will grow in their own time according to their own nature, watering themselves with your lived experience, sprouting into wisdom and compassion as you continue your journey. You need do nothing more tonight. Simply breathe, simply rest, simply allow yourself to drift into the healing ocean of sleep. May you be safe through the night. May you be peaceful in your rest. May you wake refreshed and renewed, carrying these teachings lightly in your heart. May all beings everywhere find freedom from suffering. May all beings recognize their true nature. May all beings live with ease and joy. Good night, and thank you for walking this path with me tonight. You are loved, you are complete, you are exactly where you need to be. Sleep well.